Life often took bizarre forms throughout our planet's existence. Long before the dinosaurs, their less popular but no less fascinating ancestors were already waging a fierce struggle for a place in the sun. At that time, there appeared some unusual body shapes that it's difficult to believe they existed. This was the Paleozoic era. It ended with the most massive extinction in the Earth's history. It wiped out 95% of marine species and at least 70% of terrestrial animals from the face of the planet. However, a small number of animals managed to survive. The Mesozoic era is the period when dinosaurs prevailed on the planet. They were the most advanced survival machines, perfectly adapted to the environment. They ruled the planet for 160 million years. During this time, dinosaurs developed unique hunting and defense tools and ultra-precise sense organs. It seemed that they would forever dominate all living creatures. But one day, in an instant, something stopped them. This is the complete history of how the most successful creatures on Earth evolved. From their ancestors and the emergence of these reptiles to their last days. What was before the dinosaurs on Earth? How did dinosaurs occupy all niches? Land, air, and water? How over the course of millions of years did life develop following its own laws and create such fascinating creatures? What was unusual about them? Why were these reptiles so big? Why didn't they evolve into sentient beings? Who lived in the ocean and soared in the sky? And finally, what happened on the last day of dinosaurs? A history of dinosaurs from the first to the last day of life. The supercontinent Pangaea has changed the climate, flora, and fauna. The Permian period, or simply the Perm, began 300 million years ago on the planet. It ended the Paleozoic era and lasted 47 million years until the Mesozoic. During that time, two continents, Laurasia and Gondwana, formed a supercontinent, Pangaea, with the Panthalis megaocean washing its shores. As you can imagine, the merger of two continents significantly changed the climate, flora, and fauna of the planet. During the previous Carboniferous period, the Earth was warm and humid. There were many lakes, rivers, and swamps. Forests of giant spore plants like ferns and club mosses covered the land. Trees had 1.5 meter, 4.92 feet diameter trunks and grew 10 meters, 32.81 feet tall. Mega mushrooms, prototaxites, could be seen through the haze of swamp vapors. Those green, blue, brown giants sometimes grew higher than a 2-story building. Cartilaginous fish lived in the seas. They looked like real chimeras. The distant ancestor of the shark, the Helicoprion, was perhaps the scariest because of a dental spiral with 2 or 3 turns. Its body reached 10 to 12 meters, 39 feet, and the diameter of the dental spiral reached 90 centimeters, 2.95 feet. Its terrifying lower jaw was equipped with many sharp teeth. Despite all this, Helicoprion teeth failed to break hard shells and ate only soft food like squid, krill, and shrimp. During that period, land animals were not numerous. However, some of them were big. Even insects were big and looked like monsters from horror movies. Imagine huge dragonflies, Meganeurites, Gracillipes, flying over a lake. Their wingspan reached more than 30 centimeters, 1 foot. The predecessors of our cute dragonflies were ugly and scary. They had predatory jaws, bulging eyes, and spiked legs. A distant relative of modern centipedes, a terrible arthropluri, lived in swamps. 3-meter insects ate tons of vegetation per year. They also liked to eat small amphibians. They tore them apart with strong jaws with sharp teeth. Most likely, all those giant creatures appeared due to an excess of oxygen in the atmosphere. The level of oxygen at that time was 35%. It is almost 14% higher than we have now. There is a hypothesis that the size of insects depends on the high level of oxygen. The insect respiratory system consists of tracheas. Those are tubes that supply oxygen to various organs. Because of those tubes, insects can't grow bigger now. Remember, the bigger the insect, the longer its windpipes. At the current oxygen level in the atmosphere, no oxygen will reach the organs during the inhale. Only if the concentration of O2 were higher, the long trachea would deliver oxygen to the body organs. That is why insects reached incredible sizes during the Carboniferous period. If in the future, for some reason, the oxygen level goes up, let's say up to 40%, the insects again would turn into huge monsters. The scientists calculated that dragonflies would reach the size of a small aircraft, the beetles the size of a small tank. The oxygen level also affects the size of animals, but to a lesser degree. Science does not offer an exact explanation why. One of the hypotheses says that higher oxygen levels allow big animals to get more oxygen to the muscles. In addition, higher O2 is good for the development and rapid growth of embryos and eggs. With the onset of the Permian period, the amount of oxygen in the air decreased. That's why large insects and other species lost the size-based advantage and got smaller. This evolutionary change did not happen overnight, but took millions of years. The formation of the supercontinent Pangaea significantly changed the climate. The climate during the Carboniferous period was pretty much the same all over the planet. Now it got colder and had several zones. The southern part of Pangaea, including modern India, Australia, and South America, was under ice. Snowcap covered the pole. Also, there were hot, rainless deserts inside Pangaea. There have never been more deserts on Earth than in those days. The coastlines had moderate temperatures and humidity because of the ocean. In general, the Perm climate was more like ours than Carboniferous or Mesozoic. Climate changes destroyed old flora and fauna. Without swamps and marshes, ferns and horsetails could not grow and proliferate. As the swamps became smaller, the diversity of spore plants shrank, and gymnosperms began to dominate the planet. Those were all kinds of ginkgos, coniferous trees, and palm-like cycades with thick trunks and leafy crowns. Animals also had to adapt to the new climate and adjust to arid conditions. They had to reinvent themselves to survive on a new supercontinent. Amphibians were at a disadvantage because their moist, porous skin could not stand dry air. They could survive only in lakes and marshes. No wonder many species of amphibians became extinct. On the contrary, reptiles rapidly spread across the globe because they adapted much better than others to the new environment. During the Permian period, reptiles constituted 53% of all tetrapods, compared to 13% in the previous era. At first, reptiles had small size resembling modern lizards. They fed mainly on arthropods and worms. With time, larger species appeared to prey on smaller ones. Most of the predators had powerful jaws with strong teeth, good for hunting. Nothing could prevent the reptilians from completely conquering the planet. However, a real catastrophe broke on Earth. What happened? Let us picture the last days of the Permian period before the disaster. A 4-meter, 200-kilo Dimetrodon lived in a food-rich ocean. The Dimetrodon was one of the most successful predators of the Permian. It lived during the early Permian, around 295 to 272 million years ago. Its sharp teeth consisted of incisors and serrated fangs. They were perfect for eating flesh. Reptile-like in appearance and physiology, Dimetrodon is nevertheless more closely related to mammals than to modern reptiles, though it is not a direct ancestor of mammals. Consisting of thick skin stretched over vertebral growths, the back sail was a huge advantage. The Dimetrodon used it for mating games, camouflage, and swimming. The sail helped to regulate the body temperature. It also gave a head start in hunting. Without the sail, the body of a reptilian would warm up from 26 to 32 degrees Celsius in 205 minutes. With the sail, it took only 80 minutes. Thus, the Dimetrodon could hunt early in the morning before others woke up and move. The sail also helped if the enemy, like trematophids, got in the way. Trematophids were predatory amphibians, about 80 centimeters, 2.62 feet long. Well adapted to life on land, they used sharp, long upper fangs to attack. However, the trematophids were very slow. Moreover, they could not hunt in early morning because they needed time to warm up their cold body. That is why they were easy prey for the larger and more agile Dimetrodons. During the Permian period, everybody was searching for food. A 3-meter Gorgonopsia was a predecessor of mammals. Perhaps it was partially covered with fur. Gorgonopsia also had saber-like fangs and a pineal third eye on the top of the head. It was like a periscope a reptile used for hunting at dawn. It was the best time for hunting. The Gorgonopsia also had a well-developed brain and cerebellum. It had good movement coordination. It also had long, straight hindquarters. The Gorgonopsia was not scared to hunt larger prey. Put all the details together, and you'll get the picture of the most dangerous predator of the Permian period. The Gorgonopsia hunted even for a 4-meter herbivorous Periosaurus, peacefully eating the tree bark. With sharp 15-centimeter dagger fangs, the Gorgonopsia could bite through the pineal bone armor of a clumsy animal. Its hunting strategy consisted of a series of attacks and retreats. First it jumped on the prey, then bit flesh off and retreated. It attacked again and again until an agonized prey was dead. Cynodonts were another distant ancestor of mammals. Resembling otters in appearance, they were small, up to 60 centimeters, 1.97 feet long. They were warm-blooded and furry. It meant that they did not depend on temperature fluctuations. Cynodonts could hunt at night, when bigger predators were resting. Hunting together, they could aim at bigger animals and rarely left without prey. Their success depended on sharp teeth. Sharp fangs easily tore prey to pieces. Incisors captured and bit off the flesh. Flat molars with many cutting edges chewed the prey. The thecodonts who lived in the depths of Pangaea had to move and search for a better place. The reptile looked like a modern crocodile with long legs. Together with dinosaurs and birds, it was the ancestor of the crocodile. Some kinds of thecodonts could move on 2 limbs, very, very fast. Imagine that the thecodonts traveled for many miles until they found a green oasis. There they met herbivorous ethosaurs among the trees. Those slow and clumsy reptiles were also the forerunners of dinosaurs. They had shelled and spiked backs to protect them from the predators like the thecodonts. However, there were also amphibious euscheliums. Those were easy prey for lunch. 252 million years ago, a catastrophe boiled inside the Earth. Scientists learned about it when they studied the geological layers of the planet and found ash layers. It supported the hypothesis that the catastrophe was caused by active tectonic shifts inside the planet. After the merger of the continents, the Laurasia and Gondwana lithospheric plates continued to move, and as a result, the southern plate dived under the northern one and formed huge holes on the surface in which is now India and Siberia. Thus, hot gases and magma splashed out from the inside of the planet to the surface. Hot, floating lava eliminated everything standing in its way. When magma reached the surface, its temperature was 1,000 to 1,200 degrees Celsius. It is 4 to 5 times hotter than a baking oven. What would happen to the cynodont caught in the middle of the magma river? Right, they were burnt to ashes in seconds. Eruptions set the planet on fire that spread so fast that no creature could escape. Magma eruptions and earthquakes caused tsunamis. Tall waves would have hit and drowned dimetrodons and other many animals that lived in the oasis. Imagine that the thecodonts and the echosaurs were lucky, and magma and fires did not touch the oasis. Imagine there were only quakes and some dust storms. Even in that case, the clock was ticking, and they were doomed. Magma released a huge amount of methane and carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. The planet's temperature went up by at least 2 to 3 degrees Celsius and melted frozen methane in the ocean, releasing it into the atmosphere. A greenhouse gas methane raised temperatures by another 5 degrees Celsius. All water on the planet evaporated and land dried up. The same happened in the oasis where the dinosaur ancestors lived. The greenery dried up, and most animals died. Again, surviving reptiles had to look for another place. They kept moving, but there was only a barren desert. Poisonous acid rains fell from heavy clouds. It was difficult to breathe because of particles of lava, gases, and ash in the atmosphere. There was no chance of surviving in such a hell. It is a short description of the biggest extinction in the history of the Earth. It is called the Permian-Triassic extinction, or colloquially as the Great Dying. It wiped out 90 to 95% of water species and at least 70% of land species. Fortunately, some creatures survived, including cynodonts because they hid in the burrows. The dinosaur ancestors, thecodonts and echosaurs survived too. Soon they would enter a new Mesozoic era and bring the famous dinosaurs to domination, while cynodonts, the predecessors of mammals, would have to adjust and wait for their turn. The planet took about 30 million years to recover from the Great Dying. Animals had to change and adjust to new conditions, and it took a long time. As you know, evolutionary changes take millions of years. It took nature over 30 million years to recover from the largest biospheric catastrophe on the planet, called the Great Permian-Triassic extinction. When life began to develop again, completely different animals started to prevail, who ruled the planet for the next 160 million years. They lend their name to an entire era in the development of our planet. They started their triumphant journey to the pinnacle of evolution as small creatures with bird tracks. Thanks to their great adaptability, they managed to edge out all big predators. These reptiles appeared in the Mesozoic era, otherwise known as the dinosaur era. Their first remains were found in the Triassic period that started almost 252 million years ago and lasted 51 million years. In the Triassic period, the Earth was quite different from what it is today. The land was represented by a single supercontinent of Pangaea, surrounded by the waters of the Panthalus megaocean. The face of Pangaea was constantly changing. Inland water bodies appeared and disappeared, and mountains formed. It was during this period that the Ural Range was formed. At the start of the Mesozoic era, the planet became warmer. The temperature probably rose due to the large amount of carbon dioxide that formed as a result of numerous volcanic eruptions caused by tectonic plate movement. Calculations proved that 100,000 gigatons of CO2 were emitted into the atmosphere in that period. It's a well-known fact that this gas creates a greenhouse effect. The solar rays enter the Earth's atmosphere and reach the surface as short-frequency waves. The planet heats up and begins to emit longer wavelengths of heat radiation. Some of them must go into space. But greenhouse gases don't let waves of this wavelength slip away, especially CO2. As a result, this makes the planet's temperature rise. During the Triassic period, the snow caps at the poles melted due to global warming. The climate has become less zonal, making it more homogeneous throughout the whole Pangaea. The rainy season lasted only 3 months a year. 9 months of drought followed. Then the water bodies became shallow and evaporated, drying up almost all vegetation. The supercontinent was covered mostly by barren deserts. It was very difficult for life to recover after the mass extinction under such conditions. Life continued to evolve mainly on the banks of water bodies and nearby. The plants in these green oases have changed a lot. Droughts have completely destroyed tree-like club moss and many spore fern species. The coniferous trees of the Permian period also disappeared and were quickly replaced by new plant species that were more adapted to dry habitats. Thuja and Araucaria emerged and have survived to this day. Some conifers of that time were herbs without hardwood stems. This allowed the plants to recover faster with the onset of the rainy season. Also, cycades, ginkgo, and other gymnosperms, similar to modern palm trees, began to spread throughout the supercontinent. However, seed ferns continued to dominate. Many insects flew and crawled among these plants. Crickets, beetles, exotic cockroaches with large furry paws preferred to suck plant sap or feed on pollen. But predatory insect larvae often devoured their own kind. For example, gluttonous baby snout beetles waited for prey in cicade cones. Dragonflies were flying over water bodies catching insects. And 40-centimeter mesotitanids with serrated sickle-shaped paws have gone as far as hunting small amphibians. Sharks and bony fish were fighting for prey in the open sea. Over time, they developed jaws that could easily crush crab shells and seashells. But ray-finned fish wasn't lagging behind. Like the modern pike, these predators were over 1 meter long. The newly emerged aquatic reptiles called nothosaurs were the largest hunters of the Triassic seas. Similar to giant dinosaurs, nothosaurs fished with their sharp teeth. They swam very fast and could catch up with any prey. The number of amphibians that once dominated other animals on land continued to decline, even though some species were still quite numerous. Labyrinthodonts lived in swamps, lakes, and rivers across all continents. They resembled both frogs and crocodiles, and had horizontal hips and shoulders. Their length ranged from half a meter, 1.64 feet, to 5 meters, 16.4 feet. Labyrinthodonts were carnivores who preyed on their relatives and small fish using ambush tactics. These gray-green animals blended perfectly with the environment, waiting for hours with their mouths wide open. Their jaws would slam shut whenever someone came close enough for them to reach, and crush the prey with the formidable teeth. Labyrinthodonts defended themselves from enemies with the firm shelled bone plates covering their entire bodies. As in the Permian period, numerous reptiles dominated the planet. However, they changed a lot during the Triassic period. The most advanced forms of reptiles weren't affected by the Great Extinction. The distant ancestors of mammals, called cynodonts, were among those animals. These small creatures weren't bigger than a weasel or, more rarely, a large dog. They literally had to survive under the feet of large predators. But cynodonts knew how to dig deep burrows and often lived in pairs, caring for their young. It is hypothesized that some of them had already fed milk to their offspring. Some of these animals might have been marsupials and carried their young on them. Moreover, furry, warm-blooded cynodonts didn't need to warm up in the morning. They could easily hunt at night when large predators were asleep. Having adapted to the new conditions, these reptiles spread across the whole planet. And the super predators were mostly represented by crocodiles, or rather their 8-meter crocodilomorph ancestors. These reptiles' huge teeth, ferocity, and strength terrified the animals of the Triassic world. One particular species of crocodilomorphs was given a no less terrifying name: the Carolina butcher, or Carnifex carolonensis. Visually, this 3-meter predator resembled a large crocodile. However, it preferred to live on land rather than in water, and could quickly run on its hind legs. The ancestors of modern crocodiles had extremely sharp teeth that could bite through thick reptilian shells. Finally, the first dinosaurs emerged in the middle of the Triassic period. Paleontologists find their bones all over the world, predominantly in modern Argentina. At first, these reptiles weren't giants, but they grew larger over time. But what helped dinosaurs to survive in the world of predators of the Triassic and evolve so quickly? First of all, many of them were bipedal. Interestingly, the reptiles stepped on their toes, just like birds, and not on their heels like us. This is why the traces of these small animals resemble heron tracks. Dinosaurs' legs were under their abdomen, as opposed to on either side of the body like in crocodiles, for example. Because of this, these reptiles could quickly catch up with the prey or run away from the predator. In addition, dinosaurs were inertial homeotherms, meaning that their body warmed up a lot during the day, but it didn't cool down during the night thanks to their fast metabolism. And some species have really become warm-blooded. This feature allowed them to remain active around the clock. Thus, the reptiles got a head start in obtaining food. It has also been found that dinosaurs had sedentary breathing. This process occurred due to air sacs, which were special lung growths. Dinosaurs received oxygen from the atmosphere during inhalation, and from oxygen bags during exhalation. Such a respiratory system turned out to be indispensable in the oxygen-poor Triassic period. Initially, the concentration of O2 in the atmosphere was 10 to 15%. At the end of the Triassic, the figure jumped to about 19%, but this still wasn't enough. To put this into perspective, oxygen makes up just over 21% of the current atmosphere. And in the Carboniferous period, it rose to 35%. It's also important that dinosaur skin is scaly and water repellent. It protected animals from both moisture loss and predators. Finally, dinosaur eggs were thick-shelled. Due to this, the cub's survival rate was rather high compared to other reptiles. However, the first reptiles still had an insanely difficult time in the harsh world of the Triassic. They were constantly fighting to the death for their place in the sun. Perhaps this is how dinosaurs survived alongside other Triassic inhabitants in what is now South Carolina. 200 million years ago, the rainy season could last 9 months, and small lakes turned into vast water bodies. Naturally, water always attracts a lot of animals that can drink and hunt nearby. In ancient times, huge 5-meter crocodilomorphs also loved to splash in the ponds looking for a suitable lunch. They were probably well fed, as there was plenty of fish and small reptiles to snack on during the rainy season. Carnivorous dinosaurs, such as the huge Gojirasaurus, could also come to the drinking place. The largest of them in the Triassic were over 5 meters, 16.4 feet long, and weighed 150 kilograms. These reptiles probably hunted numerous small animals near water bodies. Herds of herbivorous dinosaurs could graze in forests covered with lush greenery near rivers and lakes. In millions of years, their descendants, sauropods, will grow 10-meter necks and huge bodies weighing dozens of tons. So far, the size of these animals, for example, the ReYOUniverse, were much more modest. But some of them in the Triassic were already 10 meters, 33 feet long. Such reptiles still had elongated legs, and not column-shaped as later. But they were able to rise on their hind limbs in order to reach the young leaves on the treetops. And they already had a steady barrel-shaped body. Small reptiles could also live among the forest trees. Many of them were bipedal during the Triassic period, for instance, Eoraptorians. They were usually no longer than 1 meter and weighed 10 kilograms. These nimble predators successfully hunted small reptiles and amphibians, grabbing insects on the fly. They also looked for and crushed the eggs of other dinosaurs with their sharp teeth. In addition, small predators often hunted in packs, so they could well have attacked the baby of the huge dinosaurs. Interestingly, many of them were omnivores and didn't mind eating some plants for dessert. Meanwhile, cynodonts, the ancestors of future mammals, probably stayed in burrows during the day, guarding their offspring. Some of their species, such as Cynognathus, were already quite large. These animals were the size of a large dog, had wide jaws and sharp teeth. They could clearly stand up for themselves. However, they probably preferred to go hunting only after dark, to avoid huge predators. Cynognates were warm-blooded, so the night cold wasn't much of a problem. In a nutshell, all the animals were well-fed and satisfied during the rainy season. But water bodies would become shallow after the rainy season, leaving only a few fish alive. There would be fewer amphibians near shores, too. Voracious crocodilomorphs would find it difficult to feed themselves under such conditions. However, predators could always count on some careless young reptile to stray away from a flock of small dinosaurs at the drinking place. A strong, big-mouthed crocodilomorph armed with sharp teeth had every chance of getting it for dinner. Large dinosaurs may also have considered smaller dinosaurs as prey. It can be assumed that the small dinosaurs like the Eoraptors didn't starve themselves. After all, a lot of amphibians and insects could be found near the water bodies. Herds of huge herbivorous dinosaurs must have had a particularly difficult time. Tree-like plants would dry up completely during the rainless season. The lack of resources may have forced giants like Brachiosaurs to migrate in search of remaining forests. Moreover, they had a great chance to successfully make long transitions. Spikes and plates on animal skin protected their body from moisture loss. Perhaps when the drought became completely unbearable, large predators began to hunt each other. If a crocodilomorph and a large predatory dinosaur had a fight, the latter would surely win. According to paleontologists, ancient reptiles were more mobile than crocodilomorphs. In addition, they often ate carrion in the forests. Smaller predators would probably get some leftovers after the bloody feasts of those at the top of the food chain. With the onset of the rainy season, the animals that survived the drought, predominantly dinosaurs, returned to normal life near lakes and rivers. They went about their business foraging and laying eggs. This is how the dinosaurs became stronger on the planet. But it was most likely another global catastrophe that made them thrive. The Triassic-Jurassic extinction occurred 169 million years ago. Scientists don't have a single hypothesis on what caused it, Perhaps volcanoes contributed to dinosaurs thriving. The breakup of the Pangaea supercontinent led to intense volcanic eruptions. Numerous eruptions have caused huge amounts of carbon dioxide to be dumped into the atmosphere. It created a greenhouse effect and a dramatic climate change, and such changes are usually followed by ecosystem collapse. However, the cause of extinction may not have been connected to a global catastrophe. Some scientists believe it could be caused by cooling on the planet in the late Triassic. Polar and high mountain ice caps appeared that cooled the Earth even more. This led to the Ice Age and significant freezing of the ocean. Such a sharp change in climate caused another global extinction. It's also believed that a huge asteroid collided with our planet, leading to a disaster. However, the crater from the impact hasn't been found. However, over millions of years, it could have been wiped out by the ocean. In any case, about 50% of land animals died at the end of the Triassic. Many ecological niches became free after that. Dinosaurs were able to take them, further reinforcing their positions in the evolutionary landscape of the Earth. The Jurassic Period, or the Jura, is probably the most interesting era. After watching the famous movie The Jurassic Park, an average person might think that the Earth was populated only by dinosaurs like T-Rex. In fact, it wasn't quite like that, even though the Jurassic Period is also known as the Age of Reptiles. Let's start with the statement that the Jurassic Period, the second in the Mesozoic era, is long and complex. It began 201 million years ago and lasted about 56 million years. It got its name because the fossils were first discovered and explored in the Jura Mountains in Switzerland and France, hence the name of the period. This era is divided into three stages. The first, which lasted from 201.3 to 174.1 million years ago, is called the Lower Jurassic. At that time, life was recovering from the Triassic-Jurassic extinction that caused about half of all animal species on the planet to disappear. However, the hot and humid climate of the Jura helped life to quickly bounce back. Warm oceans and seas abounded with ammonoidea, belemnitidia, fish and reptiles. On land, reptiles, including dinosaurs, quickly filled the ecological niches freed by the previous extinction. In the process of evolution, some reptiles got wings and flew into the sky. The beginning of the Jurassic Period launched the high time for reptiles. Hundreds of dinosaur species appeared on the planet. They settled on all continents, including Antarctica. Some reached incredible sizes and proportions. Some, of course, developed formidable shapes, sometimes bizarre and scary. What are the mysteries of the prehistoric reptiles that lived on Earth 200 million years ago? At that time, the continents of the Earth were under the process of formation. The single supercontinent of Pangaea began to split into separate continental blocks. Shallow seas filled the gaps. The continents began to take modern shape. Bays deepened and separated Africa and Australia. The gulf between Africa and America became deeper too. In Eurasia, the German, Anglo-Paris, and Western Siberian depressions were formed. The Arctic Sea flooded the northern coast of Laurasia. In North America, the Rocky Mountains and the Andes were under formation. Many volcanic eruptions accompanied splitting of tectonic plates and reshaping of continents. Volcanic eruptions released huge amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and intensified the greenhouse effect. The climate of the Jurassic Period was generally warmer than the current one by about 5 to 10 degrees Celsius, and the carbon dioxide content in the atmosphere was 4 times higher. The rains were more frequent and heavy compared to the Triassic. Most of the Earth had humid tropical and subtropical climate. Huge areas were covered with lush vegetation, primarily jungles and forests. They consisted mainly of seed ferns and non-flowering woody plants. Let us remind you that plants, unlike animals, were lucky. There is no clear evidence of the flora extinction at the turn of the Triassic and Jura. Thanks to the heat and high humidity, the trees in the forest grew tall and big. Cicades are widespread in the tropics and subtropics. The era of the heyday began. During the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods, the cicades reached the peak of diversity. At the beginning of the Jura, they looked very much like palm trees. Its size puzzled even the famous botanist Carl Linnaeus and caused him to make mistake. In his classification system, the scientist placed cicades in the palm section. Tall ginkgo trees grew in areas with a temperate climate. Ginkgo crowns look like oaks, but the leaves are small and fan-shaped. It is a pity that only one kind of ginkgo tree survived till today. It is Ginkgo biloba. The cicades and ginkgos coexisted with prehistoric conifers. Those trees look like modern yews, pines, and cypresses. During the late Triassic and early Jura, conifers changed rapidly and reached great diversity. During the early Jurassic, the mid-latitude flora of East Asia was dominated by the extinct conifer podozamites, which do not appear to be closely related to any existing conifer family. Its needles were broad, more like leaves, and the tree itself was deciduous. Modern conifers are mostly evergreen, with deciduous being the exception. The lush vegetation sustained the unprecedented flourishing of life, with insects doing especially great. They were lucky. Apparently, there was no extinction of insects at the turn of the Triassic and Jura. Therefore, the forests, fields, and banks of the early Jura rivers were buzzing with all kinds of insects. Imagine predatory dragonflies flying over the water in search of prey, herbivorous beetles swarming in the thickets of plants, and arachnids like spiders and scorpions waiting for their prey. At the turn of the Triassic and Jura, the first butterflies appeared. However, by appearance, they were a pale shadow of colorful, beautiful butterflies we admire in our time. At the same time, some creatures fluttered through the Jurassic forests that looked like modern butterflies, but in fact, they were not. What is it, and how can it be explained? Well, the explanation is an amazing phenomenon: convergent evolution. The creatures that looked like butterflies in the early Jurassic, fluttered like butterflies, and even pollinated plants like butterflies, were actually Calligrammatidae. They belong to a different family of insects, and their closest modern relatives are lacewings. In the Jurassic, Calligrammatidae, of course, could not pollinate flowers, since the flowers almost did not exist in nature. They just appeared, were small and technically unsuited for insects. However, let us remind you that coniferous seed plants had cones with long tubes of nectar and pollen. They attracted the pseudo-butterflies of the Jurassic period. Thus, Calligrammatidae and butterflies are one of the many examples of convergent evolution. In evolutionary biology, convergent evolution is defined as the process whereby distantly related organisms independently evolve similar traits to adapt to similar necessities. That is why different unrelated animals can have a striking resemblance but live in different eras and on continents. For example, tenrecs are a striking example of convergent evolution. From a single colonizing ancestor, tenrecs have evolved into incredible diverse species which resemble moles, shrews, hedgehogs, and even otters. Have a look and find 10 differences. It's not an easy task, because tenrecs and hedgehogs are similar, like siblings. In fact, they belong to very distant branches of the genetic tree. One can say that tenrec has more biologically in common with an elephant than with a hedgehog. If you dig deeper, it turns out that indeed they have only an external resemblance. Talking about our Jurassic pseudo-butterflies, we can say that they were strikingly similar to real Lepidoptera. Broad wings, scales, feeding, camouflage, everything is like that of Lepidoptera. But these are completely different species. Numerous examples of convergent evolution enable us to conclude that evolution takes the shortest, optimal path. And it means that on some fantastic exoplanet with Earth-like conditions, perhaps we would have met strange but rather recognizable life forms. Amphibians at that time were yielding to reptiles. Many species died out. Only salamanders, early frogs, and caecilians, legless worm-like amphibians, still survived. Among the large species, there were still a few brachiopods, which often grew up to 3 meters in length. The record holder was found in Lesotho in Africa. According to its fossilized remains, scientists estimated its size at about 7 meters. Throughout history, only Prionosuchus were large amphibians, but they lived and went extinct in the Permian period. Brachiopods had flat bodies and spatulate heads. The mouth had razor-sharp teeth with which predators could instantly tear apart the victim. Despite proliferation, later their numbers declined. But the number of reptiles grew rapidly. Before the dinosaurs separated into a single group, the overall reptile diversity grew in number and species at an impressive pace. They gradually gained dominance in water, on land, and in the air. Real monsters lived in the warm tropical seas of the Jura, often frightening, but no less amazing and beautiful in their own way. They barely squeezed through the bottleneck of the Triassic-Jurassic extinction, and began to gradually grow stronger at the beginning of the Jura. One of the most notable is ichthyosaurs. There were many different types of them. On average, they were quite large, 2 to 4 meters. But due to the favorable environment, as evolution proceeded, individual species reached enormous sizes. The largest known to science, Shonisaurus, grew up to 15 meters. The champion among Shonisaurus is Shastasaurus, boasting up to 21 meters length. Some species of ichthyosaurs looked rather strange. The body is exactly like that of a shark, but the head of a gharial crocodile, with a long, narrow snout. It could be called a bad joke of nature, like a modern platypus. Interesting, ichthyosaurs had very large eyes protected by a ring of bone. According to paleontologists, it might help in night hunting. It was also great for diving because large eyes helped to see at least something. With eyes of 25 centimeters in diameter, temnodontosaurs could still see at a depth of up to 1,600 meters. 600 meters deep in the water, human eyes are unable to see except complete darkness. It is known that at a depth of 800 to 950 meters, the light intensity is about 1% of noon illumination on the surface. It is interesting to know that ichthyosaurs are viviparous and warm-blooded. It may seem counterintuitive since we're used to the fact that reptiles, crocodiles, snakes, lay eggs. To lay eggs, reptiles need land. Even sea turtles come ashore to lay their eggs. As for ichthyosaurs, they breathe air, and their native element was water. When reptiles got wings back in the Triassic period, Pterosaurus appeared. At the beginning of the Jura, they were still recovering from the mass extinction of species, and the Rhamphorhynchidae family was more or less noticeable. They ate mainly fish. The reptiles reached great diversity on land. Prehistoric turtles in general were similar to modern ones. The land was dominated, of course, by dinosaurs. Paleontologists identified over 900 different genera and over 1,000 species of non-avian dinosaurs alone. In the early Jura, they quickly occupied the free niches after extinction. It is a stereotype that all dinosaurs were huge. In fact, they had different sizes. Some did not exceed the size of chickens, and some grew into huge monsters. Most dinosaurs were carnivorous and hunted for prey. Some dinosaurs were herbivorous. They slowly stomped through the forest, shaking the ground and nibbling at all the vegetation. At the beginning of the Jurassic, about 82.7 to 74.1 million years ago, interesting dinosaurs lived on the territory of modern Zimbabwe. Volcanodons. Discovered in 1969 on a small island in the Kariba Reservoir in Zimbabwe, it was regarded as the earliest known sauropod for decades, and it is still one of the most primitive sauropods that has been discovered. As a quadrupedal, ground-dwelling herbivore, Volcanodon already showed the typical sauropod body plan with column-like legs and a long neck and tail. It is one of the very first dinosaurs found on Zimbabwean soil. The Latin name Volcanodon literally means tooth of the volcano. The fossils were found in a small sandstone between two solidified lava flows. This was enough to get a specific name. Based on the nature of the rock in which the fossils of Volcanodon were found, its habitat, the Batoka Formation, was a hot, sandy desert. Not the most favorable place for life, but still there were islands of vegetation, a few rivers, and even rarer oases. The length of the Volcanodon reached 6.5 meters. Height was up to 2.5 meters. It weighed up to 2.5 tons. Some researchers are more generous with estimates and say it was up to 11 meters in length and up to 3.5 tons in weight. This herbivorous dinosaur moved on 4 legs, but it could rise on 2 legs, for example, to eat branches. Volcanodon, with its relatively small size and ability to move quickly, could well feed itself even in the desert. Due to the sparse vegetation, the Volcanodons were not fussy about the menu. And like any other natural vegetarian in the entire history of evolution, Volcanodon itself often became food for the predatory reptiles of that time. Evidence of this was already received at the time of the first discovery of the remains of Volcanodon. And it all started with a curious riddle that became a puzzle. South African paleontologist Michael Rott discovered several teeth near the pelvic Volcanodon remains. However, the head and neck were not found. The shape of the teeth was rather strange, more characteristic of predators. According to the scientists, the dying Volcanodon could bend over in agony, so that the head was at the level of the pelvis, hence the discovered teeth. Another fact in favor of the theory: a similar pose is sometimes found among dinosaur fossils. Because of such unusual teeth in a herbivorous dinosaur, the researcher mentioned it in the name of the genus. If everything is confirmed, Volcanodon would be considered omnivorous, like modern bears. However, in 1985, another researcher, Michael Cooper, proved that the teeth probably belonged to an unknown theropod, a dinosaur. Most likely, the predator attacked the Volcanodon, but not entirely successfully, so it even broke a couple of teeth on it. But this attack was still fatal to the victim. This is how Volcanodon, ironically and scientifically, got its name in honor of the teeth of its own killer. The killer of that same Volcanodon has never been identified. It could well be the predatory theropod Dilophosaurus, if we conclude that those two genera intersected in space and time. But in order to see the incredible Dilophosaurus, we need to go back in time to another continent, Laurasia, where at that time the outlines of the future continent of North America were already formed. Dilophosaurus lived in what is now Arizona in the United States, between 199.3 and 190.8 million years ago. It was an effective predator, fast and incredibly agile. It hunted for herbivorous dinosaurs. The Latin name Dilophosaurus comes from the Greek words for two-crested lizard. It was based on an unusual bone formation on the skull with 2 flat semicircular ridges. It was a decorative organ playing a role in mating games. The closest modern example is the combs of basilisks and iguanas. A red comb of a rooster belongs to the phenomenon of the same nature. The body length of Dilophosaurus reached 7 meters, height up to 2 meters. It weighed up to 400 kilograms. At the beginning of the Jurassic period, these are very impressive dimensions for a predator. Dilophosaurus was the largest predator at the time. In this sense, scientists sometimes refer to it as an early Jurassic T-Rex. As an adult, it was a threat to almost any local animal. However, the Ceratosaurus or Scelidosaurs, who lived at the same time in the territory of Arizona, could be hunted by Dilophosaurus only in pairs or even in groups. The former two were herbivorous, but they could fight back. In any case, this early Jurassic theropod occupied the top of the food pyramid. Judging by the narrow jaws and long teeth, it preferred to hunt relatively small animals, taking advantage of its size and strength. High speed and flexibility allowed to catch even very tiny and fast dinosaurs, such as Scutellosaurus. After analyzing the jaws, scientists concluded that in the absence of large prey, a significant share of its diet could be fish and other water inhabitants. Sometimes it would eat decaying flesh of dead animals. Coelophysis was a small, slenderly built, ground-dwelling biped carnivore that could grow up to 3 meters, 9.8 feet long. It was one of the earliest known dinosaur genera. The name Coelophysis comes from 2 Greek words that mean hollow form. The reason for this is simple. Thanks to the hollow bones of the limbs, Coelophysis had an extremely light skeleton. Coelophysis lived in late Triassic and early Jurassic about 208.5 to 109.8 million years ago. According to other estimates, Coelophysis proliferated during a relatively short period, from 228 to 200 million years ago. These reptiles were common in North America, especially in the New Mexico region, as well as in South Africa and Zimbabwe. This slender, squat predator looked small compared to Dilophosaurus. The body length of the Coelophysis reached 3 meters, height up to 1 meter, and weight up to 30 kilograms. The teeth of the Coelophysis are typical of carnivorous dinosaurs, blade-like, curved backwards, sharp with small serrations on both the anterior and posterior edges. Although it was carnivorous, they followed a different hunting strategy than large dinosaurs of the Jurassic period. Representatives of the genus hunted large prey in flocks. The North American valleys in the late Triassic and early Jurassic were mostly deserts. However, there were green oases on the uplands, mountains, hills. On these plateaus or in the mountain forests, flocks of predatory Coelophysis tracked down their prey. Presumably they used special shouts, alerts in their language. It is possible that the Coelophysis developed some primitive tactics and could hunt down a large herbivorous dinosaur. They surrounded the prey and attacked together. Most likely its diet consisted of smaller animals, reptiles, and lizards. Their fossils were often found along with the skeletons of Coelophysis. By the way, here's a curious fact. For a long time, until the early 2000s, Coelophyses were considered cannibals. It was indicated by the remains found at the Ghost Ranch in New Mexico. There, cubs of its own species were found in the stomach of the prehistoric adult Coelophysis. However, later it turned out that the find was misidentified. Later, the cubs were classified as Hesperocicus, the usual prey for the Coelophysis. In general, it is one of the most studied Triassic-Jurassic theropods, all thanks to the many remains found, including several complete skeletons. The Ghost Ranch has a spooky reputation because there is a cemetery of Coelophysis skeletons. What happened there is not entirely clear. while Coelophysis is among the most notable fossils found at Ghost Ranch. The site is rich with examples of many different species of dinosaurs and crocodilians. An even smaller but remarkable dinosaur in the early Jura. The name suggests the African country of Lesotho. Indeed, the first remains of this microsaur were discovered in the high African country of Lesotho. These animals lived in the period of 199.3 to 190.8 million years ago. The body length of the Lesothosaurus reached 2 meters, and this is the maximum. Estimates of height vary greatly, from 40 centimeters to 1 meter and even more. Weight estimates are also in a wide range, from 3 to 10 kilograms. Since we're not talking about a species, but about a whole genus, such an error is normal. Lesothosaurus moved on 2 long, thin legs, which allowed it to develop impressive speed. The 5-fingered forelimbs of Lesothosaurus were small but well developed. From the outside, they may seem like a miniature likeness of human hands. By analogy with our little finger, the 5th finger was poorly developed. With these very hands, he touched and held the plants he was eating. Rhomboid teeth lined up along the jaws of the Lesothosaurus. In front of the upper jaw were 12 teeth, similar to arrowheads. This light structure of the teeth is not very suitable for grinding hard food, but it is quite suitable for cutting soft stems or leaves. The body of the Lesothosaurus was elongated and light, somewhat reminiscent of archosaurs, which barely stood on 2 legs. A thin, long tail was important for balancing when moving quickly. In general, because of the short skull and elongated body, the Lesothosaurus was somewhat reminiscent of a bipedal lizard that decided to get up on 2 legs and run. This, in fact, can be done by some modern reptiles. Lesothosaurus was a very fast and nimble animal. At the slightest sign of danger, turned on its legs. Did he have enemies? Of course, at least the same Coelophyses. When we mention small living creatures as typical prey of Coelophysis, Lesothosaurus fits into this category. The long-legged Coelophysis could easily keep up with the Lesothosaurus. The latter did not have any means of protection. No serious claws, no armor, no fangs, like Lycorine. What is Lycorine? Finally, a very miniature dinosaur, which is difficult to call a dinosaur, but still very interesting, at least because it puzzled paleontologists with a lot of mysteries. Its very name symbolizes. Lycorinus means wolf face. Fangs were found on the remains of the jaw, although the rest of the teeth testified to herbivory. Lycorinus lived in the early Jurassic period, about 199.6 to 196.5 million years ago, in the territory of the modern Republic of South Africa. The body length of Lycorine reached 1.2 meters. Height up to 50 centimeters. He weighed up to 10 kilograms. The Lycorine moved on 2 limbs, which is also characteristic of its relative Heterodontosaurus. Lycorinus had strong, light legs and a long tail for improved balance. Well-developed upper limbs served as convenient manipulators when eating plant foods. In front of the teardrop-shaped head, behind the hard, beak-like end, there were large, sharp fangs. Because of this, he was first mistaken for a descendant of the animal-toothed lizard of the Cynodont suborder. Judging by the jaw, the diet of this gourmet dinosaur included everything in a row, both succulent stalks of ferns and horsetails, and more solid food, the roots and bark of trees. When the predators attacked the Lycorinus, they risked being bitten hard. But of course, only camouflage and quick feet could save Lycorinus from hungry predators. Finally, we want to remind you that not all dinosaurs were giants. Many were something in between a chicken and a lizard. For example, a Lesothosaurus, plus it took 100 million years before the appearance of real giants. We already know about large predatory monster Dilophosaurus. To see other amazing large herbivores, we'll go to the southeastern part of the Laurasia continent, the lands of modern China. Here on the territory of the current province of Yunnan, in the period 201.3 to 168.3 million years ago, monsters roamed, named after the place where the remains were found, ReYOUniverse. The body length of ReYOUniverse reached 13 meters, height up to 4.3 meters. It weighed up to 3 tons. This is incomparably small compared to the giants of the later periods with their tens of tons of weight. But for the early Jura, it is already something. ReYOUniverse moved mainly on 4 legs, but spent a significant part of the time on 2. So he could reach the chosen branches on the trees or threateningly expose his forelimbs when a predator approached. These peculiar hands of his were quite large, and, like the legs, were equipped with impressive claws. At the end of the long neck of ReYOUniverse was a small, elongated head. Particularly noteworthy are the spoon-shaped teeth, of which there were more than 60 in the jaws. When the jaws were compressed, they were located close to each other. Therefore, they were self-sharpening. This feature is not found in prosauropods like ReYOUniverse, but appears in later sauropods like Brachiosaurus. Thus, animals that lived at different times and are not close relatives have a common feature. We again see an example of convergent evolution. If scientists found only the teeth of ReYOUniverse, then by its shape, they could mistakenly classify it as a sauropod. Herbivorous ReYOUniverse move from one natural pasture to another, not being particularly picky in their food. The unique teeth made it possible not only to effectively pluck the foliage of tall plants, but also to eat undersized ferns with horsetails. Theoretically, ReYOUniverse could live in herds for better defense from predators. We see something similar now in the savannas of Africa, when lions hunting herds of buffalo often have to run away when herbivores fight back. At the end of the first stage of the Jurassic Period, a cooling trend set in on the planet. Ice started to cover some areas. The icing was not strong enough to hit the mammals. These animals were mostly covered with fur and lived in burrows. No wonder that cold temperatures hurt dinosaurs who like to live in a warm climate. As we can see from the example of the Coelophysis, not all species survive colder weather. Of course, much more amazing reptile species lived in the early Jura. We know only about a small part from the crumbs of the remains that have been preserved. The Mid-Jurassic period is dated from 174.1 million to 163.5 million years ago. Back then, the supercontinent Pangaea began to separate into Laurasia and Gondwana. Numerous earthquakes accompanied the continental split. This transformed the way the planet looked. The Cimmerian tectonic plate on the south coast completely blocked the Tethys Sea, making it inland. And the plate movements in the western North America coast have formed the Rocky Mountains. The Atlantic Ocean emerged as a result of tectonic shifts, which washed the supercontinent that hadn't yet split into 2 parts. Not only has the way the planet looked, but its climate has also changed. At the end of the first stage of the Jurassic period, the Earth got colder. Some areas became covered with ice. However, scientists doubt that this temperature drop caused the formation of massive polar ice caps. High summer temperatures most likely melted the snow and prevented it from accumulating in one place. Although individual small glaciers could have formed on the mountaintops. As for the temperature of the ocean, researchers are almost unanimous. During the Middle Jurassic, unlike the land, the ocean warmed up by about 8 degrees Celsius higher than now. Due to the rather warm and humid climate, lush vegetation covered most of the land in winter and summer. In the southern belt, groves of palm-like cycases and tree ferns spread. Some of these fern species have survived to this day. Near the poles, coniferous trees dominated the forest. They were the predecessors of modern cypresses, cedars, and yews. The polar climate, with hot summers and cold, sometimes snowy winters, was quite suitable for these plants. In other parts of the planet, non-flowering plants such as ginkgo and cicuses prevailed in the mixed forests. Male cones of these trees bore pollen that was carried by the wind over great distances. This allowed the plants to effectively pollinate the female cones and spread across the planet. Forest-free areas were filled with thickets of herbaceous ferns and club mosses. The lush vegetation and warm climate facilitated the development of all living beings. And this is exactly why Middle Jurassic is considered one of the key periods in terrestrial life evolution. Numerous flies and dragonflies flew in the forests and on the banks of water bodies, while beetles looked for something on the ground. One could already hear the trills of the archaebolus crickets in the dense thickets. In 2021, scientists from China, the US, and the UK reproduced their sound based on well-preserved fossils from the Jilangshan Formation in China. The experiment was conducted using a resonant mechanism tuned to a frequency of 6.4 kilohertz. The results showed that the males made pure tonal, that is, musical sounds. Besides the insects, almost all other animal species successfully reproduced in favorable conditions of the Jurassic. The only thing was that the number of amphibians continued to decline. Giant crocodilomorphs no longer threatened all living things. By that time, 7-meter Pseudosuchia, Labyrinthodonts, and Ravasuchia had completely disappeared. Only relatively small crocodile-like species survived. The ancestors of modern crocodiles were among these aquatic reptiles. They lived on land and in the waters of the Jurassic period throughout all of Pangaea. Marine crocodiles have even mastered saltwater. They have long, narrow snouts and sharp teeth, perfectly designed for catching fish. Some varieties of sea crocodiles have grown tail fins and flippers instead of legs to swim faster. The warm seas of the Jurassic were teeming with arthropods. All crustaceans that now live in freshwater bodies used to live in the marine environment. In our time, only crabs remained in the sea. In addition, new species of large sea turtles appeared in saltwater in the Middle Jurassic. But plesiosaurs would probably steal the spotlight from all these creatures. The huge monsters were up to 16 meters long, had wide, flat bodies and short tails. They had large flippers on their legs that were very handy in the aquatic environment. Interestingly, plesiosaurs breathed air and gave birth to their young. There are also facts that suggest they were warm-blooded. The most prominent feature of these animals was an insanely long neck. They had 76 vertebrae shaped like hockey pucks. Any modern giraffe would envy such a neck. These animals weren't agile, but they could easily find food. Using flippers, they hovered in the water for hours, swallowing krill and other small sea creatures swimming by. Other similar species were commonly called plesiosaurs. They had short necks and large heads. Some of them were up to 17 meters long and were the size of modern orcas or even larger. Despite being huge, plesiosaurs were fast and agile and could be considered major marine predators of those times. The mid-Jurassic sky was also teeming with life. One could often see pterosaurs flying in the sky. They weren't afraid of cold spells. They had a soft tissue crest on their heads that was probably used for thermal regulation. In those days, they were most commonly long-tailed animals with a lot of sharp teeth. Their wide wing webs were connected with the hind legs. Strong claws made pterosaurs efficient climbers that could have lived in trees. Pterosaurs were predators who ate insects or small vertebrates. But as soon as these flying creatures landed on the ground for prey, they found themselves in the world of dinosaurs. Reptiles remain the most common animals on the planet. They were constantly fighting for survival. Over the years, each dinosaur species developed its own defense and attack system. Megalosaurus can be considered one of the largest and undoubtedly dangerous predator of those times. They were up to 6 meters long and weighed about 700 kilograms. Megalosaurs walked on 2 powerful hind legs, holding the vertical body position using a long, thick tail. These dinosaurs had short but very strong forelimbs and were armed with long, knife-like teeth. When hunting, they helped predators instantly rip apart the prey's flesh. But another predator, V. venator, made quite a splash in the press. In 1998, scientists found in Minden, Germany, a rib 50% larger than that of an Allosaurus. But the Allosaurus was one of the most gigantic carnivorous dinosaurs of the Mesozoic era. In the media, the new reptile was unofficially dubbed the Minden Monster, and scientists began to calculate the giant's size. At first, it was assumed to be 15 meters, then 12 meters long. However, some researchers estimate that the animal was from 7 to 8 meters long and weighed up to 1.2 tons. But no one in the Middle Jurassic could compete in size with sauropods. For example, with Cetiosaurus. At first, scientists viewed them as aquatic creatures similar to very large crocodiles. By then, nonetheless, they were classified as dinosaurs. The giants were about 16 meters long and weighed about 11 tons, but their tails and necks were shorter than those of most sauropods. They lived in floodplains and in forests, where they ate the shoots of trees of the middle and lower stories. However, next to the other megagiants of the Jurassic, the Cetiosaurs seem the smallest ones in the family. Their bigger brothers, such as Brachiosaurs, were 18 to 21 meters long. If it were possible to measure their weight, the scales would show as much as 31 to 39 tons. Brachiosaurs had their own unique differences from other sauropods. They had disproportionately long necks and small skulls. Also, what's unusual about the dinosaurs' legs is that the front ones were much longer than the hind ones. Thanks to this, they could easily eat leaves from the treetops, keeping their balance with a short but powerful tail. With this tail, the lizards could have well crippled the enemy. Although it's unlikely that many predators would dare to attack such giants. However, not only the giants were quite comfortable in the Jurassic forests. Herbivorous dinosaurs, or ornithopods, were only about a meter long, but they were probably very fast. The stiff tail helped ornithopods balance when running on their hind legs. Over time, they began to graze on all fours more and more often, as it was more convenient this way to eat low vegetation. Apparently, their spine began to bend because of this. In the end, these dinosaurs developed a hump on their backs like modern bison. Ornithopods turned into the coolest guys of the Jurassic period. They quickly ran on 2 legs and were very agile tree climbers. But most of the time, they moved or grazed on all fours. Probably such a wide range of movements helped these dinosaurs survive among large predators. Small cynodonts are considered the predecessors of mammals. They were hard to spot among other dinosaurs. In the middle of the Jurassic, they were still widespread throughout the land. One of the most numerous among the cynodonts were the Triteledontids, Triteledontidae, who were as little as 10 to 20 centimeters long. But these babies were far from being harmless. Perhaps some of them were omnivores, but most of them ate very small animals and insects. Most likely, they found their prey using vibrissae. This is the name of a special set of animal sensors, the whisker sensory system. Due to this, as well as some other anatomical features, Triteledontids are considered related to mammals. Scientists believe that vibrissae have played an important role in the evolution of mammals, from huge tigers to the smallest shrews. However, in the middle of the Jurassic period, mammals were still quite small, but they already had great species diversity and a large population. New research shows that mammals evolved 10 times faster in the middle of the Jurassic than in the end. Scientists have not yet figured out exactly what triggered this evolutionary explosion. Environmental changes are cited as one of the potential causes, or perhaps such properties as live birth and ferocity in predators helped them to survive. In addition, they were mostly covered with fur that kept them warm at night. So they could well have hunted at night, not being afraid of predatory dinosaurs resting at that time. This allowed mammals to thrive in a variety of habitats and adapt to changing ecologic systems. All animals found their niche on Jurassic Earth, and perhaps 170 million years ago, one of them lived in the forest near one of the many water bodies. We can speculate what their life was like. The lush thickets of the forest and the lake were probably densely populated, because they were favorable conditions for the life of various animals. A huge megalosaurus would come out of the forest to the water body looking for dinner. If an equally formidable venator went there looking for food, they could engage in a cruel fight. Both dinosaurs are armed with sharp teeth and thick skin. The banks of the river and the nearby forest would probably be shaking from their fight. If, say, the larger venator won, it would probably enjoy the enemy's flesh and sustain himself for several days. Well, with so many predators lurking around, mammals most likely didn't dare to leave their burrows until night. They were in no hurry. They could as well hunt in the dark. The animals loved to eat conifer cones and ginkgo seeds. Sharp teeth allowed mammals to easily crack hard seeds and nuts, and the fur kept them warm at night. At dawn, a very hungry 20-centimeter-long triteledontid could climb out of the burrow. After a short search, it managed to find a tiny lizard for breakfast, which wasn't warm yet and couldn't escape fast enough. A young half-meter crocodile would come out during the day to take a sunbath on the riverbank. It had no idea it was being closely watched by a 2-meter plesiosaur hiding in ambush. When the crocodile decided to return to the river, it was snatched by the predator right away. Meanwhile, herds of herbivorous dinosaurs could graze in the forest near the riverbank. The long-necked brachiosauruses seemed to find a real treat of young juicy leaves and shoots at the treetops. The lower branches were inaccessible to them because the giants weren't able to bend their necks that far. They needed to consume over half a ton of vegetation a day. And then the herd had to move to another forest to find food. Sauropods traveled great distances and spread across the planet. Unlike them, Cetiosaurus ate leaves in the middle and lower forest story. Due to their short necks, they couldn't reach higher. However, this saved Cetiosaurus from rivalry with Brachiosaurus. So in the forest, there was enough food for both. After a couple of days, the venator could again disturb the unstable tranquility of the forest. Having digested its prey, the giant was hungry again. Failing to find suitable prey, it would probably have dared to attack the Cetiosaurus, or even a larger Brachiosaurus. But it's unlikely to win this time. The herds of grass-grazing sauropods would most likely fight off the attack with powerful tails. But with so many animals living in the forest, the venator was bound to end up with at least something for dinner. Sooner or later, it would have caught smaller prey like some ornithopod who failed to escape. So day after day, life thrived in the forest near the lake in the fertile climate of the Mid-Jurassic. But this period was now coming to an end. In the past, scientists believed that a mass extinction could have occurred at the end of the era. However, additional research suggests that the animal world went through a major transformation at the end of the Mid-Jurassic. These changes were facilitated by the split of Pangaea and the shift of continental plates. At that time, some animal groups became more diverse, while other animal species disappeared. Dinosaurs also changed a lot. But what exactly happened to them? Stay tuned for the next episode, where we cover what happened next. The Late Jurassic is the third and final epoch of the period, lasting from 163.5 to 145 million years ago. The land at that time was nothing like in the Middle Jurassic. It formed two supercontinents instead of one. Pangaea, which was already coming apart at the seams, finally split into Laurasia in the planet's north and Gondwana in the south. As a result, the Atlantic Ocean emerged, but it was still relatively narrow. On both continents, the climate remained very warm and humid, as in the modern tropics or subtropics. At the start of the Late Jurassic, between 164 and 150 million years ago, the Earth warmed up again following a slight drop in temperature. The temperature reached the daily average of 30 degrees Celsius. The planet warmed up due to the greenhouse effect resulting from numerous volcanic eruptions. They filled the atmosphere with a huge amount of carbon dioxide. Even at that time, seasonal fluctuations on the planet became less extreme than at the start of the Jurassic. This was due to the expansion of the Central Atlantic and Western Indian Ocean. These huge water bodies made the climate on the entire planet more humid, reducing deserts to a minimum. At the end of the Jurassic, the temperature dropped by several degrees. The cooling began 150 million years ago and lasted until the early Cretaceous period. Thanks to the warm and moist climate, most lands were covered in thick vegetation all year round. The forests were full of cycads, ginkgos, and tree ferns. But in general, coniferous trees prevailed on the planet. Araucariaceae were the most common among coniferous plants and spread across both supercontinents. These gigantic evergreen trees were over 60 meters high. Their trunks were just humongous, and big heavy cones hung from the branches like magic giants' earrings. The pollen from these cones flew thousands of kilometers away, giving rise to new coniferous forests. Despite their gigantic size, conifers were sometimes washed away by powerful water streams during seasonal floods. Many trees took root on the sandy mudflats, where they found some fertile soil. In addition, they would often grow under layers of volcanic ash rich in mineral fertilizers. This is how coniferous trees quickly spread to new areas. The lush vegetation made animal life thrive even more compared to the Middle Jurassic. Forests and shores were teeming with various insects. In the Lower Jurassic, their population grew larger than ever before. Numerous beetles spread far and wide, swarming under forest trees and near the water in the search of food. Predatory dragonflies, which already looked like modern ones, flew over the water looking for prey. They ate tiny midges, but were often hunted themselves by a lot of spiders. Some spiders were real giants like the ones you see in horror movies. One of the largest known fossil spiders, with over 5-centimeter long legs, was found in China. Besides insects, the condition of the Jurassic were favorable to almost all other biological species. And only amphibians continued to decline, giving way to reptiles. Contrary to this trend, salamanders became more populous and spread throughout the planet. In particular, giant salamanders who lived exclusively in water were one of the most conspicuous species. Some of these amphibians have survived to this day, reaching almost 1.5 meters long. On the sides, these creatures have huge skin folds that increase body surface and improve oxygen absorption from the water. The warm waters of the late Jurassic were also inhabited by many fish. Bony fish quickly spread in the seas and freshwater. Some of them were truly gigantic, but no one could compete with Lydsichthys in terms of size. Scientists found the bones of individuals that were up to 30 meters long, which is bigger than a modern whale shark. But don't think that Lydsichthys devoured every marine creature that came their way just because they were that big. According to scientists, it was the size that played a cruel joke on huge fish. Being that big, the clumsy and unmaneuverable Lydsichthys couldn't be good hunters. Like modern whales and giant sharks, they fed on plankton, krill being the primary food source, which was abundant in the late Jurassic seas. Lydsichthys caught krill by filtering the water through their gills. But the giants themselves also became easy prey for predators, and perhaps had a terrible death. Paleontologists have found Lydsichthys scales bitten by plesiosaurs. They believe that even a small sea reptile could easily snatch a piece of meat from such a fish. However, Lydsichthys were most likely much more tenacious than modern whales and were quite difficult to kill. Several days could pass before the sea giant would die, and all this time the predators gnawed at the prey while it was still alive. Thanks to the abundance of food in the Jurassic waters, plesiosaurs quickly reproduced and became exceedingly diverse. New species of long-necked plesiosaurs emerged in the late Jurassic. For example, Cryptocleides and Murenosaurs. Murenosaurus were approximately 5 to 15 meters long. Moreover, their long necks with 44 vertebrae accounted for half of this size. Their body was straight, and they heavily relied on plesiosaurs to survive in the cruel Jurassic world. The animals didn't need to raise their necks above the water, which made swimming easier. It was also more convenient for them to get close to the fish before feeling water pressure changes caused by large plesiosaurs. Sharp conical teeth made it easier for them to hunt prey, especially bony fish and cephalopods. Life was thriving in the sky too. The first birds, Archaeopteryx, were about the size of a crow, lived in treetops. Instead of a beak, these unusual creatures had a pair of toothy jaws and freestanding fingers on their wings. Unlike modern birds, Archaeopteryx didn't yet flutter in the sky. Instead, they were clumsily gliding from branch to branch. Pterosaurs flew better than Archaeopteryx, and many species of these creatures soared high above the trees in the late Jurassic. Some of them resembled modern birds. If you went to the Jurassic and saw a tenacosmatoid pterosaur in the sky, you would mistake it for a duck or a wader. Among other things, they had similar wings in terms of shape and size. Pterosaur's flying style, with frequent and powerful wing beats, was probably similar to that of a waterfowl. Tenacosmatoids also had long wings and necks, straight jaws, and needle-like teeth. They were aquatic or semi-aquatic pterosaurs that typically lived in coastal regions and near lakes. There, tenacosmatoids caught fish and other small animals they came across when looking for food. As for the land, all kinds of reptiles imaginable inhabited both continents of the late Jurassic. Big and small, herbivores and carnivores, as fast as modern antelope and as slow as hippos. Here are some of the most fascinating dinosaurs that lived on the planet 163.5 to 145 million years ago. The Allosaurus was considered a formidable hunter of the Jurassic period. On average, the predator was 8.5 meters, and sometimes even up to 9.7 meters long and 3.5 meters high. The giants weighed over 1.5 tons. It's also believed that there were much bigger individuals. This is evidenced by some reptile fragments found by paleontologists. These finds suggest that dinosaurs were up to 11 meters long and weighed over 4 tons. All Allosauruses had relatively large skulls with short but incredibly massive jaws. In 2005, mandibular modeling showed their bite force was more powerful than that of any modern animal. At the same time, scientists believe they held their prey not as tight as tyrannosaurs. However, this hardly prevented Allosaurus from dominating among predators of the late Jurassic. Firstly, as we mentioned in previous episodes, tyrannosaurs emerged only in the Cretaceous period. Secondly, Allosaurus probably didn't rely that much on the bite force of their jaws. Like monitor lizards, they rather relied on flexible necks and sharp teeth in their struggle to survive. Special indentations on their teeth enabled Allosaurus to easily cut the bones of the prey. Torvosaurus was almost as impressive in terms of size and hunting potential. This name was coined by paleontologists to call large and sturdy bipedal predators that could grow up to 9 to 10 meters long. It's believed that Torvosaurus had short but very powerful arms. Most likely, nature has equipped its thumb with a huge claw. Paleontologists suggested that with massive skulls, strong teeth, and powerful flexible bodies, these reptiles were perfectly adapted to ripping apart and dismembering large carcasses of herbivorous sauropods. Most likely, Torvosauruses were capable of cracking and eating their prey's bones. Next to such huge predators, Compsognathus seemed like miniature dwarfs. One of the smallest dinosaurs known, they were about the size of a chicken. However, they were a bit longer, about 60 to 90 centimeters. The dinosaurs' tails and necks also had different length. They weighed about 5.5 kilograms. For small animals, avoiding carnivorous Compsognathus was probably a smart move. Compared to other reptiles of that era, they were excellent hunters and fast runners. Compsognathus weren't massive. They had strong hind limbs and very small forelimbs. They caught reptiles and small living creatures, instantly tearing them apart with sharp teeth. Scientists speculate that Compsognathus could hunt in packs and pose a threat to larger prey. However, it's unlikely that even a huge flock of Compsognathus would be able to defeat a Stegosaurus, who looked like a super heavy armored tank. Like other sauropods, they were herbivores, so they didn't see other animals as a potential meal, but instead developed an excellent system of protection against predator attacks. These giants were up to 9 meters long and weighed up to 7 tons. Their backs flaunted thick bone plates. Paleontologists have long argued how the plates were positioned on the animal's back. So far, the scientific community established that they formed 2 rows. If that's true, the plates of one row grew opposite the gaps of the other row. Some scientists also believed that the plates were movable and could change their angles. The growths were believed to defend Stegosaurus from being attacked by larger predators. But the plates were too fragile and left the sides unprotected. This gave rise to a theory that they took part in thermal regulation, like a Spinosaurus sail. Or they were meant to attract a potential partner during mating season. Or perhaps Stegosaurus used them to scare and mislead predators. With red and bony plates filled with blood, these reptiles looked bigger and certainly more formidable. However, the Stegosaurus also had more serious weapons. There were 2 pairs of threatening spikes on the monster's tails, each about 1 meter long. The spikes were quite efficient for self-defense. Other sauropods didn't have such massive weaponry, but their sheer size was enough to guard off predators. All these herbivorous dinosaurs are very similar. They all had columnar legs, long necks and tails, thick skin and small heads. However, each of them was unique in its own way, which enabled them to better adapt to the environment. For example, 15-meter Camarasaurus sauropods had unusually big nostrils. Scientists believe this kind of natural conditioning system was used by the reptiles to cool down the brain. But Camarasaurus's necks had only 12 vertebrae and were relatively short. They were just over 3 meters long. Another sauropod, the Diplodocus, had a longer neck with 15 vertebrae. Until now, researchers argue about how sauropods could live with such necks. It seems that different giants solved this issue in their own way. Most likely, Diplodocus held its neck at up to a 65-degree angle. This is evidenced by their powerful vertebrae that could serve as a sturdy column base. To put this in perspective, Brachiosauruses spent most of their time with their necks upright. On the contrary, the Sarmientosaurus that was found a few years ago in Argentina almost always kept its head close to the ground and looked like a giant vacuum cleaner when eating. But let's go back to our Diplodocus. Sharp keratinized spikes up to 18 centimeters high rose menacingly on their backs. These growths were probably used for self-protection. And of course, Diplodocus' superweapon was their uniquely long tails that had as many as 80 vertebrae. And yet, Diplodocuses lived in small herds to protect themselves even better. Some individuals in these herds were 32 meters long. Only Supersaurus could compete with Diplodocus in terms of size. Based on the found bones, some animals were 33 to 34 meters long and weighed over 40 tons, according to some estimates. However, only fragments of supersaurs have been found so far in the state of Colorado. This makes it difficult to accurately estimate their size. Can you imagine what modern mice would look like next to such behemoths? Unimpressingly minuscule. However, the Jurassic world had enough of those guys, and they were quite resilient. These mammals perfectly adapted to the environment thanks to their warm-bloodedness and newly emergent fur. Being protected from the cold and even sharp eyesight allowed them to hunt at night when large predators were inactive. During the day, they mostly hid in burrows in the forests and along the shores. One of the largest mammals of the late Jurassic was Castrocauda, a semi-aquatic Docodonta genus. In fact, even these champions were tiny. They weighed just about 500 to 800 grams, and their tails were 425 millimeters long. The animals looked like modern otters, and their curved teeth closely resembled those of seals. Therefore, scientists assumed that Castrocauda mainly fed on fish like otters and seals. At the same time, the animal's wide front paws, similar to those of platypuses, were perfectly adapted for digging and searching for food on land. These mammals were already partially covered with fur. These animal species, who were drastically different in size, habits, and food preferences, lived side by side in the Jurassic world. Let's imagine dense thickets of a tropical forest near a lake. Many different animal species used to live in this fertile corner of the planet. Let's imagine a huge brontosaurus eating food in the pond. Such reptiles were almost 22 meters long and weighed over 15 tons. But these giants had very small heads and brains. With a brain the size of a walnut, Brontosaurus certainly wasn't the brightest when it came to reaction speed and ingenuity. But it didn't need them. None of the inhabitants of those places would dare to attack such a monster. Brontosaurus could spend hours quietly standing on its thick log-like legs in the lake, chewing on soft aquatic plants. Many reptiles were probably scurrying about in the thick ferns. It was a great lunch for the little Compsognathus. Fast dinosaurs were quite efficient at catching no less nimble reptiles and other small creatures. Entire herds of herbivorous dinosaurs may have gathered for lunch in the forest. Camarasaurus could easily find food in the forest's lower tier. Relatively short necks allowed them to eat leaves and young shoots at the bottom of giant trees. Unlike them, huge Diplodocus-type sauropods must have been able to gnaw only at the treetops. They couldn't bend their insanely long necks far enough to reach the bottom. Like scissors, Diplodocus cut all the leaves and shoots they could reach. These giants needed to eat up to a ton of vegetation a day. When the food ran out, the herd of giants most likely left in search of a more suitable spot. Scientists know this from the pieces of rose quartz found in Jurassic deposits across all continents. Diplodocus swallowed the mineral to improve gastric function. Other sauropods used other minerals for better digestion. Interesting, herbivorous reptiles used a special herd pattern when traveling. Adult dinosaurs surrounded the young in a dense ring to protect them from predators. There were a lot of predators who didn't mind feasting on young, strayed dinosaurs. But young sauropods were constantly supervised by adults, so the attack would most likely result in the predator's injury or death. A herd of giants was quite capable of killing even a large enemy with powerful tails capable of knocking down trees. A predator dinosaur would hardly take such a risk. Rather, it would try to catch smaller prey, such as a Compsognathus. But this chicken-sized dinosaur was very fast and could easily escape. And at night, all the dinosaurs probably went to rest. Then mammals such as Euramia could come out of their burrows looking for food. These small animals were similar to modern shrews and were about 70 to 100 millimeters long. Strong, wide teeth allowed animals to chew literally any plant food, including hard seeds and tree nuts. Before dawn, the Euramia would no doubt have eaten their share and darted back to a safe spot. They certainly didn't mean to encounter a large predator. This is how dinosaurs' days went in their favorite corner of the planet. The usual life of ancient reptiles and other animals on the planet was interrupted once more by the Jurassic-Cretaceous extinction. It turned out to be relatively insignificant, wiping out about 20% of all living things on the planet. The extinction was caused by the tectonic plates sinking into the ocean. As a result, its waters became cold and extremely deep. This took a major toll on marine life, such as mollusks and corals. The few survivors moved to the shallow waters. Consequently, many food chains changed and affected other ecosystems. Giant sauropods partially disappeared. Stegosaurus and Diplodocus died out, but their niche was quickly filled by new species. In the next period, the Cretaceous dinosaurs reached their prime. There was probably not a single corner of the forest or the shore without these reptiles. It seemed that they would dominate the planet forever. But one single disaster wiped them all out. Imagine a dense, humid forest where you can't see the sky for the trees. Many tree trunks are very huge. In the sky, you can see some fascinating creatures with some crests. Incredible giants make their way from the thickets, crushing everything in their path. Can you imagine that this bulletproof armor doesn't even have a single unprotected spot? What is this mysterious world? Perhaps some distant planet? It may remind you of Pandora from the iconic Avatar movie. But you don't need to go that far. In fact, this is what Earth looked like over 100 million years ago. Then, in the Cretaceous period, the world was just teeming with incredible creatures. Imagine a multi-ton Mamenchisaurus that shook the whole forest with the stomp of its huge feet. Of course, the ancient reptile didn't put out anything, but used its long neck to reach some real delicacies, like the most tender and juicy young shoots at the treetops. The Cretaceous period had so many fascinating animals. Where did the twins of ostriches and kangaroos come from in the early Cretaceous? And how did the ancient reptiles create real fight clubs for training the young? The Cretaceous period, or Cretaceous, started 145 million years ago. This is the longest epoch of the Mesozoic era. Scientists divide it into the early and late Cretaceous. The first period lasted almost 45 million years and ended 101.5 million years ago. Compared to the Jurassic period, the Earth changed in many ways. The Jurassic Cretaceous extinction led to the shift in food chains that reshaped other ecosystems as well. Giant sauropods partially disappeared, and the Stegosaurus died out. But their niche was quickly taken by new species. Dinosaurs stood at the top of the evolutionary pyramid. They continued to thrive on Earth. By the early Cretaceous, the supercontinent Pangaea had split into Laurasia and Gondwana. The tectonic shifts started to divide these huge landmasses into modern continents. As the Atlantic Ocean expanded, it formed the North American Cordilleras. Approximately 110 million years ago, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge separated South America from Africa, which formed new tectonic plates. The same process in the Indian Ocean pushed India northward. Australia and Antarctica started to resemble their modern shape. At that time, the climate on Earth was relatively cool. The cooling of the last Jurassic epoch lasted until the end of the early Cretaceous. There is evidence suggesting that the snowfalls were common in the areas near the poles. Also, the tropics became wetter during the Triassic and Jurassic periods. In general, the Earth was warmer in the early Cretaceous than now. The very humid and warm climate of the early Cretaceous caused forests to spread even further. They were filled with angiosperms such as cycades, ginkgo, and nitrophytes. However, flowering plants hadn't yet emerged. Many coniferous trees grew near the poles. A lot of tree ferns also grew in the forests, and their grass relatives took over unforested areas. The Polypodiales fern was extremely common during the Cretaceous, accounting for 80% of this plant class. What makes Polypodiales unique is their photoreceptors. Thus, such ferns could efficiently perform photosynthesis in low light, for example, in the shade of huge trees. Due to the supercontinent's split and further movement of tectonic plates, warm, shallow seas flooded vast areas. A wide variety of marine organisms lived in these water bodies. Rays, modern sharks, and bony fish became commonplace. Huge bony fish, Axelrodichthyes, inhabited sea lagoons, fresh lakes, and rivers. Most of these species were from 1 meter, 3 feet 3 inches, to 2 meters, 6 feet 7 inches long. The giants ate small fish and krill. Like its modern relative, the coelacanth. Axelrodichthyes had elongated, flat, and wide skull. It allowed the fish to suck food from empty spaces between stones and crevices in underwater rocks, much like a vacuum cleaner. At the same time, aquatic reptiles were undoubtedly at the top of the food chain in seas and lakes. There were still some ichthyosaurs around, but they were mostly replaced by different plesiosaur species. The amazing Machaira rosica was probably about 5 meters long, 16 feet, but had a short neck. Its hind and forelimbs ended in long, straight flippers, which allowed this plesiosaur to swim quickly and hunt fish and other aquatic animals. Once in the mouth of the Machaira rosica, the prey had no chance to escape. Scientists believe that this animal's teeth are unique. They have a triangular shape, numerous grooves, and small teeth along the ridges. Such weaponry helped the predator hold slippery fish and quickly rip it into pieces before swallowing it. Aerial predators also look for food near the water. Real birds were already flying in the early Cretaceous sky. And their predecessors, the Archaeopteryx, were quite populous at that time. These small crow-sized creatures had curved beaks and very sharp teeth. They could instantly tear apart prey such as small reptiles, fish, and insects. But most of the niches of aerial predators were occupied by numerous winged reptiles called pterosaurs. If we could see the Icrandraco pterosaur in the sky, we would instantly think of the planet Pandora from Avatar. This creature is very similar to the dragon from the iconic picture. But do you think that this incredible flying reptile decorated itself with a crest just for fun? Well, it didn't put it on like a crown. The crest was on the lower jaw of the Icrandraco. It helped the reptile to hook up the fish and firmly hold it with its teeth. And 3 centimeters of the edge of the Icrandraco's jaw had as many as 4.5 teeth. A special hook was also found on its crest. It may have served as an attachment point for a food-storing throat pouch, similar to the modern pelican. This outlandish creature was most likely not as big as a dragon, although its exact size is unknown. So far, only a few very elongated animal skulls have been found, some with a predominant blade-like ridge on the underside. Pterosaur skulls are from 26.8 centimeters, 10.5 inches, to 28.6 centimeters, 11.2 inches long. On land, the moist Cretaceous forests were filled with various insects, including some new species. The most ancient ants known today were already creating their colonies, and some relatives of butterflies and moths called Lepidoptera began to fly. Aphids lived on the trees, grasshoppers chirped in the thickets, and gall wasps flew in the sky. Termites also existed in the Cretaceous period, having evolved from cockroach ancestors. In modern ecosystems, they play an important role in decomposing plant residues and other waste. This suggests that prehistoric termites did a similar job. Paleontologists also believe that insects have already developed social behavior by building nests together. Virtually all corners of the planet in the Cretaceous period were filled with reptiles. Many dinosaurs, turtles, and snakes lived in forests and water bodies. But most of them were dinosaurs. There were animals the size of a chicken, but mostly large reptiles prevailed. Other herbivorous reptiles called Mamenchosaurus could easily make it into the record book of the Cretaceous period if dinosaurs wrote it. Of all the ancient reptiles known to paleontologists, they had the longest neck. These animals were up to 26 meters, 85 feet long, and weighed up to 80 tons. And their famous necks averaged about 14 meters, 46 feet. If such a giant somehow miraculously got into our world, it could easily look through the roof of a 3-story building. However, there is another candidate for having the longest neck among the Cretaceous animals, the Seismosaurus. With a 36-meter body, 118 feet, and a weight of 30 to 50 tons, it could possibly stretch its neck as high as 20 meters. But unfortunately, there's not enough information to know this for sure. Only a few bones of such herbivorous reptiles have been found, which isn't enough for an accurate assessment. However, paleontologists were already able to learn something interesting about the giants. Most likely, Seismosaurus lived in the steppes and swamps. Just like Brachiosauruses, they spend most of their lives in the water. The young ensured their safety by living in herds, while adults more often lived alone. These dinosaurs ate mainly swamp and aquatic vegetation. But not only huge dinosaurs spread throughout the planet. Mammals successfully evolved too, but were overshadowed by reptiles. In those days, mammals were still very small, mostly the size of a shrew or a little bigger. Some of them already closely resembled modern animals. Small Tribosphenida looked almost like miniature kangaroos. It is even possible that the females carried their young in a skin fold, a pouch on their bellies. In addition, their body was partially or completely covered with fur. They had a modern structure of the ear and some other body parts. Tribosphenida lived in small burrows deep underground, so most likely they weren't easy prey for the Cretaceous predators. All these animals spent their lives looking for food, often fighting in bloody battles to win their place in the sun. Here's what their life was like in one of the corners of the Earth during the Cretaceous period. Let's imagine dense thickets of a tropical forest near a warm sea lagoon in the area of modern North America. It can be safely assumed that this place was densely populated with various animal species. Perhaps some obscure outline towered over the lagoon water for hours. Were they tree trunks or some kind of vines? In fact, neither. It was a huge, long-necked plesiosaur, such as Elasmosaurus, looking out for prey. Most likely, the lagoon was full of fish, like other warm water bodies of the Cretaceous period. Plesiosaurs had enough food. These large animals were good swimmers and divers and were hardly afraid of other predators' attacks. The plesiosaurs probably hunted quietly in the lagoon for hours until their belly was fully stuffed with various mollusks. Then they would go into the shallow water to rest and digest. Mammals like Tribosphenida must have been looking for coniferous tree cones and other fruits of angiosperms for food. Some of these small herbivorous animals were marsupials, meaning that they carried their young in a pouch. The babies could feed on their mother's milk while she tried to get herself something for dinner. In the fern thickets, there were a lot of lizards scurrying about, and lizards would make a great dinner for flying reptiles. For example, the Icrandraco pterosaur. If it glided to catch the prey with its claws, the nimble lizard would, of course, try to escape into the thicket. If the hunt was unsuccessful, the pterosaur would have to keep hunting. Undoubtedly, it would end up at least with some catch, because the thick Cretaceous forests were filled with small creatures. However, no doubt, there lived a lot of large animals as well. Numerous herbivorous dinosaurs probably gathered for lunch in the forest. Mamenchosaurs lifted their insanely long necks like fire escapes and nibbled on the tender young leaves at the treetops. When food ran out, they moved to other forests. At the same time, these reptiles preferred to be in herds, which helped them protect the young from numerous Cretaceous predators. This is how dinosaurs and other animals lived on the lagoon banks, in the abundance of food and in the favorable climate of the early Cretaceous. How did the life of early Cretaceous animals end? Actually, nothing noteworthy happened at the end of this era. There were no abrupt climate changes, extinctions, emergence of some animal species, or extinction of others. Scientists simply decided that the appearance of the calcareous nanofossil Prediscosphaera columnata is a good point for dividing the period into the lower and upper Cretaceous. Be that as it may, dinosaurs continued to evolve, and their number and species diversity grew anyway. What incredible reptiles dominated the Earth in the upper Cretaceous? How high did they climb the evolutionary ladder just before the unexpected disaster wiped them out forever? The second stage of the Cretaceous began 101.5 million years ago and ended 66 million years ago. At that time, dinosaurs could no longer roam freely around the planet. Inside the Earth, tectonic plates continued to move, changing the shape of the land on the surface. America gradually moved westward, causing the Atlantic Ocean to expand. The western inland sea route divided North America into eastern and western parts. India kept heading north towards Asia. In the southern hemisphere, Australia and Antarctica were probably still connected and began to move away from Africa and South America. Europe was a chain of islands. By the very end of the period, the continents started to resemble their modern shape. Africa and South America have acquired their usual outlines, but India hadn't yet collided with Asia, and Australia was still part of Antarctica. On all the continents in the late Cretaceous, the climate was much warmer than today, although it gradually became slightly colder. By the end of the Cretaceous, the tropics persisted in the equatorial regions, and in the north the seasons began to change. The summers were quite hot, and in winter the temperature significantly dropped. The vegetation on all continents was more or less the same. The forests mainly consisted of cycads and ginkgos. Conifer trees were more common closer to the poles. At that time, flowering plants had already emerged, and by the end of the Cretaceous period, they'd become quite diverse. In temperate regions, one could see a lot of redwoods and willows, and even magnolias and roses decorated the planet with their beautiful flowers, where dinosaurs could take selfies. But of course, animals couldn't do it. On all continents of the planet, there were thickets of sassafras. These were deciduous trees and shrubs from the laurel family, which are widespread even today. It can be assumed that these plants could survive billions of years of evolution due to their high vitality. Sassafras could break even from under stones and grow in such conditions for years. Many insects fluttered and crawled in the forests and on the banks of water bodies. And there were a lot of creatures that would really surprise modern people. Here, for example, is Manipulator modificaputus. Nowadays, some devices are called that. And if we talk about Cretaceous, this is the name of the extinct predatory cockroach. This is a nanomonster of the Cretaceous period with an elongated neck and a freely rotating head. The insect's body was only 4.5 millimeters, 0.18 inches long, and 2 millimeters, 0.079 inches wide. The cockroach also had unusually long legs. According to scientists, this indicates its predatory lifestyle. So it was easier for a tiny predator to chase prey, for example, microscopic midges. The Burma pogon flies were probably even more cruel hunters. They belong to a species that scientists call killer flies. These are powerful, bristly flies with a short, thick proboscis covering a sharp, sucking larynx and pharynx. The term killer flies reflects the insect's aggressive habits. They tirelessly waited for the prey in an ambush and then quickly caught it right on the fly. New creatures also appeared in the warm seas and lakes of the late Cretaceous. Stingrays and modern sharks populated the sea, as well as many bony fish species. At the bottom, sea urchins and starfish thrived, and coral reefs continued to grow. Ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs gave way to huge snake-like mosasaurs, some of them real giants and well over 17 meters, 56 feet long. Mosasaurus preferred to live in the open ocean and deep coastal waters. Sometimes they caught small fish and, more often, hunted very large and well-protected prey. They preferred to eat marine reptiles for lunch, especially turtles and plesiosaurs. These dinosaurs even devoured their own kind, resorting to cannibalism. Scientists believe that at a young age, Mosasaurus could attack animals larger than their size. Mosasaurus' teeth were well adapted for cutting and crushing, and their massive jaw muscles provided tremendous bite force. Mosasaurs dismembered their prey into many relatively small pieces before eating. Most giants couldn't swallow large pieces of prey whole. The sky of the late Cretaceous period was already quite densely populated by small, real birds and their predecessors, Archaeopteryx. But the most populous were winged reptiles, pterosaurs. Some of them were absolutely amazing creatures. The Quetzalcoatlus pterosaur is considered one of the largest known flying animals of all time. Paleontologists have found bones of individuals up to 10 meters, 33 feet tall, but weighing only 70 kilograms, 150 pounds. As huge as airplanes, the creatures had unusually long, stiff necks. They had a crest on their heads, although its exact shape and size are still unknown. The scientists have calculated the wingspan of flying giants. It reached 16 meters, 52 feet. This is higher than a two-story house. But the fantastic properties of the pterosaur don't end there. It perfectly combined the air and land lifestyle. Quetzalcoatlus flew effortlessly using hovering and wing flapping. At the same time, they were quite good at running on the ground on four legs, like modern hoofed mammals. This helped the pterosaur to be a successful Cretaceous predator. Using a long, sharp beak, Quetzalcoatlus caught fish and little vertebrates on land or in small streams. Well, it didn't even avoid carrion like a marabou stork. And of course, the dinosaurs dominated on land, big and small, slow and super fast, herbivores and predators. Nodosaurus became the most common among herbivorous giants of the Cretaceous. These four-legged reptiles didn't look much like the huge sauropods of the Jurassic period. They had relatively short limbs compared to the columnar legs of the Jurassic sauropods. They didn't grow to be as high as the megagiants of the Mesozoic era. On average, Nodosaurus were 6 meters, 20 feet long, and weighed 3.5 tons. But this animal was quite well protected. Their body was covered with an impenetrable shell of a dense bone plate layer, so the giants could safely eat young shoots in the forest without fear of predators. Their elongated muzzles with massive jaws, small leaf-shaped teeth, and a horny beak were perfectly adapted for their diet. But other predominantly herbivorous dinosaurs, namely Therizinosaurus, can be called real monsters of the late Cretaceous period. These reptiles were probably 9 to 12 meters long and weighed up to 6 tons. They walked on 2 massive legs, and their forelimbs were very long and reached 3.5 meters. But their terrible claws made them look like Freddy Krueger from the famous horror movie. Although the largest specimens of claws found by paleontologists were incomplete, they were estimated to be almost a meter long. Scientists haven't yet come to consensus as to why the dinosaur needed such equipment. However, it's obvious that it gave the reptile some survival advantages. For example, Therizinosaurus could defend themselves with their terrible claws against larger, more aggressive predators, such as Tyrannosaurus, or fight for territory or a female with the dinosaurs of the same species. It's likely that Therizinosaurus also used their claws to pull branches with the most succulent leaves to their mouth. But they also ate insects and may have torn apart nests of ants and termites. Finally, there is a hypothesis that the claws helped the reptiles to rest in a safe place, hanging from trees like modern sloths. It seems that there were no creatures in the world more terrible than these reptiles with their mega claws. But what would you say about the Hadrosaurus if you got to know it better? These huge animals were up to 25 feet, 7.6 meters long, and weighed 8 tons. Like chimeras, they had wide noses resembling a duck's beak and hooves on their front paws. And on their heads there was a hollow helmet. Most likely, the helmet served as an airbag for the dinosaur and allowed it to keep its head underwater while looking for food. Or the dinosaur made sounds of danger, warning relatives by releasing air from the helmet through its nostrils. The Hadrosaurus's skin was covered with small scales, and there were bone growths on the skull. There was a huge number of teeth in its scary mouth. Some animals had about 1,000 teeth. It was the most toothy dinosaur among all the ancient reptiles that ever existed. And yet Hadrosaurus would certainly have seemed almost innocent-looking compared to Triceratops. It would seem their only look could render anyone speechless. These huge reptiles were 8 meters, 26 feet long, and weighed 9 tons. Paleontologists consider the largest skull among land animals to be an amazing find. About 2.4 meters, 8 feet long. It belonged to a Triceratops. So the monster's head was a little less than a third of its entire body. But what made the giant Triceratops head truly scary were 3 horns. A horn protruded menacingly over the animal's nostrils, and one grew over each eye. An even more unusual feature of the Triceratops was a kind of firm bone collar around the neck. The purpose of this growth, as well as the reptile's horns, have long been discussed. Traditionally, they were seen as a defensive weapon against predators. But now it's considered more likely that the horns were used primarily in courtship and to fight relatives. Everything is like that in modern deer, mountain goats, and even rhinoceros beetles. Triceratops' skin was also unique. It was incredibly thick and, according to some evidence, was bristled in some species. However, the formidable appearance, thick skin, bone collar, and horns didn't save the Triceratops from the attack of the most aggressive predators of the Cretaceous period. In popular culture, one can often see fights of horned reptiles with tyrannosaurs. Scientists confirm that this might be true. They found a Triceratops skull with teeth marks from a Tyrannosaurus rex on the frontal horn. Furthermore, there were found the heads of these dinosaurs severed from the body, also with traces of T-Rex bites. Although one shouldn't think the giants dominated among the late Cretaceous dinosaurs. Velociraptors were much smaller than tyrannosaurs, but also very dangerous. Velociraptor, meaning swift invader, is a medium-sized dinosaur. The largest adult specimen known to paleontologists is 2.07 meters, or 6.8 feet, long, and weighed up to 15 kilograms, 33 pounds. The jaws of these fast and aggressive predators were equipped with 26 to 28 widely spaced, very sharp teeth on each side. And the front paws were crowned with a large claw that could grow more than 6.5 centimeters, 2.5 inches long. Most likely, it served to tear apart or grab a resistant prey. Mammals of the late Cretaceous, compared to fascinating reptiles of that time, seemed humble-looking and inconspicuous. Basically, these were animals resembling modern mice, both in terms of size and appearance. But there were also absolutely amazing creatures among them. For example, Cronopio with long front teeth. Paleontologists believe this mammal looks like the bizarre saber-toothed squirrel from the Ice Age franchise. Despite the fact that the planet was abundant in food for every taste, all these animals had to fight hard for their place under the Cretaceous sun. They spent their lives in constant pursuit of prey and in bloody fights for food. The small Struthiomimus, which is literally translated as an ostrich imitator, indeed resembled this modern bird. Struthiomimus was about 4.3 meters, 14 feet long, and weighed approximately 150 kilograms, 330 pounds. These outlandish animals had beautiful big eyes and rather repulsive toothless jaws. They had long, thin arms and hands. The reptile's 3 fingers were about the same length, and their claws were slightly bent. This probably allowed dinosaurs to sometimes hunt fish and insects, although they mostly ate plant foods. Most likely, Struthiomimus served as prey for large Cretaceous predators. However, it was certainly not easy for predators to deal with these dinosaurs. The reptiles had unusually powerful hind limbs and relatively short, stiff tails. This allowed them to perfectly balance when running, turning, and jumping. Struthiomimus is thought to have run at about 50 to 80 kilometers per hour, 31 to 50 miles per hour, so it could easily escape enemies. But none of them could compare with ankylosaurs. These Cretaceous creatures, armored from head to toe, were probably not afraid of anyone in the world. Their entire body was covered with a shell in the form of bony spikes and plates. Moreover, the larger ones alternated with the smaller ones. Even the skull and the outer back of the lower jaw of this monster were armored. Those are some super formidable weapons. However, the monstrous creature didn't need it for attacking others, as these reptiles were exclusively herbivorous. The dinosaurs used all their armor only to protect themselves from numerous predators. In general, ankylosaurs were massive quadrupedal creatures with short, powerful limbs. Their abdomen was unusually very low, only 30 centimeters, 1 foot above the ground. The small, triangular teeth and a long, flexible tongue prove that these animals could breathe while chewing the leaves. This also allowed them to eat up to a ton of greenery per day. Ankylosaurus tended to feed on vegetation at a height of 1 meter or lower. Scientists believe that their diet included short ferns, cicades, and other angiosperms. Predators certainly avoided the herds of such living fortresses as ankylosaurs. Even the famous tyrannosaurs were cautious. By that time, these reptiles had already begun to dominate among the carnivorous dinosaurs. Tyrannosaurus had a keen sense of smell and vision, powerful jaws, and strong, sharp teeth. T-Rex weighed up to 7 tons, which suggests they had impressive muscle mass. The strength and ferocity of these animals was something unheard of. There is even a theory that tyrannosaurs from a young age went through military training in the best traditions of the Cretaceous. Scientists believe that T-Rex organized special fight clubs for the young. There, the reptiles bit each other with terrible force, but most likely they didn't try to kill each other. Paleontologists learned about this by examining bite marks on animal skulls. But T-Rexes always hunted alone, and only a few animals on the planet could stand up to them. Carcharodontosaurus was their only worthy rival in the early Cretaceous. These carnivorous monsters were up to 8 meters long and weighed about a ton. That is, they were longer and heavier than tyrannosaurs. Carcharodontosauruses were called dinosaurs with sharp teeth, as they had strong dagger-like teeth. Thanks to such victories, tyrannosaurs became increasingly common across the planet. This is evidenced by the growth of their number. Scientists have studied all possible factors that could impact the T-Rex population size for the entire time they existed on the planet. Researchers calculated the population density of these predators, the area of their habitat, life expectancy, as well as the total number of generations. According to the data obtained, there are about 2.5 billion T-Rex living on Earth over just 2.5 million years. On the contrary, other plesiosaur species, namely Elasmosaurus, had incredibly long necks that consisted of somewhere between 32 to 76 vertebrae. At the beginning of the Cretaceous, Elasmosaurus was on average about 6 meters long, 20 feet, and weighed up to several tons. These extraordinary creatures mainly ate crustaceans and mollusks. Long necks allowed Elasmosauruses to plunge their heads deep into the water in order to scoop up as many animals as possible with their mouths. This is how, perhaps, animals lived in one of the corners of the planet on the shores of a lagoon of a warm, shallow sea. It often rained here, and the shores were probably covered with thickets of tall ferns with long, lush shoots. A little farther, there was a green forest. There must have been a lot of animals there. Most likely, it was impossible to call it a peaceful and friendly neighborhood. Lagoon inhabitants had violent fights all the time. Predators were looking for prey, and they also tried to get something for dinner, but at the same time not to get into someone else's teeth or claws. Perhaps one day a young Hadrosaurus came out to the lagoon to freshen up and catch small aquatic prey. As we know, its head had a growth in the form of a helmet. The dinosaur could swim well if this crest served as an airbag. Most likely, the lagoon water was teeming with fish, like other warm Cretaceous reservoirs. And the Hadrosaurus would probably decide to catch one of them for dinner. But as soon as it entered the water and was getting ready to hunt, something huge could jump out of the depths. Long and saw-sharp teeth would then dig into the Hadrosaurus flesh. Powerful jaws closed, breaking the reptile's bones, and the dead carcass would be dragged under the water. This was probably a mosasaurus that jumped out of the sea and had a successful hunt. Such prey was well suited for this water reptile. In the second episode of Jurassic Park, it's shown how a giant mosasaurus destroyed a boat with people. It may well be that the largest individuals could actually do it. But of course, after having a prey as huge as a hadrosaurus, the mosasaurus was satiated and didn't go hunting for a long time. The small inhabitants of this corner of the planet were also probably looking for food. Similar to the saber-toothed squirrel Chronopio, was looking for conifer cones and other fallen fruits for food. It was careful not to get into any predator's teeth. And as such, a predator could well have appeared right from the sky. This hungry Quetzalcoatlus soared down to get the little animal for dinner, but it managed to dodge the claws of a flying predator and darted into its burrow. However, in the thickets of ferns, there were definitely many reptiles scurrying around. They perfectly matched the food requirements of the flying dinosaur, and it could easily keep on hunting. In the end, no doubt, it was bound for success, because there were more than enough small living creatures in the Cretaceous forests. However, there lived many large animals too. In the forest, herds of herbivorous dinosaurs probably gathered for lunch. 12-meter Therizinosaurus could reach very high and gnawed on tender young leaves from the treetops. When food ran out, they moved to other forests. At the same time, the reptiles preferred to be in herds. Such a lifestyle helped them protect their young from numerous Cretaceous predators. Unlike them, lower animals like 6-meter Nodosaurs fed in the middle forest tiers. These reptiles also lived in herds, which helped defend off predators. They certainly had strong bone armor, but together they could also whip off the enemy with powerful and hard tails. Tyrannosaurus, which probably lived in that forest, also went hunting. It could take care of its own lunch. For example, catch a small velociraptor. Of course, the T-Rex is an unsurpassed warrior and would easily tear to pieces this reptile the size of a large Christmas turkey. But don't forget that its potential prey ran fast, and like all the inhabitants of the Cretaceous, was constantly on the alert. The velociraptor must have rushed off quickly and disappeared into a thicket, and was difficult for the Tyrannosaurus to chase. However, the Tyrannosaurus would hardly have been left without prey. This predator always had a chance to catch some slower little dinosaur. But what if the T-Rex ran into another huge reptile in its hunting grounds and decided to attack it? For example, it met an 8-meter Triceratops. It would seem that just one look at this terrible 3-horned reptile with a huge collar around its head is enough to scare off the enemy. But that was not the case with the Tyrannosaurus Rex. This aggressive, agile dinosaur could well have pounced at the enemy. Apparently, the unsurpassed T-Rex could easily avoid the horns and bite through the enemy's thick skin. Having killed the Triceratops and fed on its flesh, it would have gone to rest deep into the forest for several days, and scavengers like velociraptors and other small dinosaurs may have devoured the remains of the carcass for a long time to come. Therefore, dinosaurs and other animals spent their days fighting on the shores of a picturesque lagoon. Even in the midst of an abundance of food, they had to fight, not for life, but for death. In the end, there were probably no absolute winners among them. All species survived. According to the paleontologist findings, the number of individuals and species diversity of dinosaurs on the planet grew until the end of the Cretaceous period. All these animals, of course, didn't know that their last day would soon come. Then, apocalypse could not have been predicted by even the most advanced modern analyst using a quantum computer. Death came from the sky, and the impact of a single asteroid the size of a mountain destroyed most of the living beings on the planet. But the celestial killer couldn't completely turn the planet into a lifeless desert. Dinosaurs became extinct, but small and inconspicuous mammals waited out the disaster in burrows deep underground. Later, they took advantage of the lack of competition from the huge reptiles and achieved supremacy in the new world of the Cenozoic era. Though that's another story. The Triassic period spanned about 51 million years, from the end of the Permian, 251.9 million years ago, to the beginning of the Jurassic, 201.36 million years ago. It began after a major biological cataclysm, the Permian-Triassic extinction. The Triassic is of central importance in terms of the origin of modern ecosystems, because on its onset marks the end of Paleozoic and the origin and expansion of modern evolutionary fauna. New types of corals formed in the marine environment. They were much smaller than today. In the early Triassic, they clung desperately together to form reef patches occupying their biological niche. The shell-shaped cephalopod mollusks, the Ammonoidea, barely survived the Great Extinction. Only single species left out of many. They quickly replenished lost numbers and gave a wide variety of offshoots. Scientists still find many fossilized remains. If we look at the fossils, they resemble modern nautilus. Indeed, they are close relatives, but their periods are distant from each other. The shape of Ammonoidea shells is a striking example of beauty and harmony of nature. The shell spirals of each mollusks correspond exactly to the very golden proportion, which can be observed almost everywhere in nature as a beauty code. It had an influential effect on many cultures. In medieval Europe, fossil Ammonoidea were thought to be coiled snake rings. That is why people call them snake stones, and believed in their magic healing properties. In the Triassic period, the oceans were inhabited by many species of fish. However, much more interesting creatures were marine reptiles. In particular, Pachypleurosaurs and Nothosaurus, both of which were common in the Middle Triassic, especially in the waters of the Tethys Ocean. There were also many Placodontius, Plesiosaurs, and lizard-like Askeptosaurus. The first ichthyosaurs appeared in the Triassic and spread rapidly almost all over the world's oceans. Ichthyosaurs were not dinosaurs, but represent a separate group of marine vertebrates. They shared the seas of the world with the other great groups of large marine reptiles, the Plesiosaurs and Mosasaurus. The environment was unusually favorable, a perfect balance between available food and dangerous enemies. Ichthyosaur means literally fish lizard. The name is quite apt because they looked like a combination of fish and reptile. The earliest ichthyosaurs had long, flexible bodies and probably swam by undulating like living eels. More advanced ichthyosaurs had compact, very fish-like bodies with crescent-shaped tails. Ichthyosaurs appeared in the early Triassic. Because ichthyosaurs were so specialized and modified for life in the ocean, we don't really know which group of vertebrates were their closest relatives. They might have been an offshoot of the diapsids, the great vertebrate group, or descended from a distant relative of the turtles. If the last memory is true, then it was a return to the ocean. Evolution did regressions many times. Millions of years later, the same happened when land mammals returned to the sea and evolved into dolphins and whales. The shape of these ichthyosaurs is like that of living tunas and mackerels, which are the fastest fish in the ocean. Like them, the later ichthyosaurs were built for speed. We can also compare the ichthyosaurs to the dolphins. Ichthyosaurs actually gave birth to live, well-developed young. Ichthyosaurs never had to leave the water to lay eggs. They still breathed air and lacked gills. In the 90s and in 2012, Japanese scientists finally proved that ichthyosaurs were warm-blooded too. Ichthyosaurs were about 2 to 4 meters long on average. Due to most favorable environment, some species reached enormous sizes as they evolved. The largest one is the Shonisaurus that grew to 15 meters. The record belongs to a Shonisaur, Shastasaurus, that boasted a length of 21 meters. The Triassic began with the largest mass extinction in Earth history and ended with a series of substantial extinctions. The extinction was most widespread in the oceans. Marine reptiles almost entirely disappeared. A few species of plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs survived. Invertebrates such as brachiopods and mollusks, especially gastropods, suffered a great deal. An entire class of conodonts, sea eels, disappeared completely. It is roughly estimated that between 23% and 34% of entire marine life disappeared. What caused the end Triassic extinction remains to be determined. Some scientists blame huge and widespread volcanic eruptions as a trigger. Some 200 million years ago, an increase in atmospheric CO2 caused acidification of the oceans and global warming that killed off 76% of marine and terrestrial species on Earth. Other scientists blame asteroid or comet impacts. Indeed, one of the largest craters on the planet, Manicouagan Reservoir in Quebec, dates back to a late Triassic period. Later, radiometric dating placed it about 13 million years earlier than the Triassic-Jurassic extinction event. Anyway, the mass extinction created the vacant ecological niches, which immediately was taken by surviving species. This devastating event cleared the way for dinosaurs to dominate the Earth for the next 135 million years. Many new dinosaurs emerged, in great numbers on land and ocean. The Jurassic period spanned from 199.6 million to 145.5 million years ago. The Jurassic was a time of significant global change in continental configurations, oceanographic patterns, and biological systems. During this period, the supercontinent Pangaea began to split apart into large northern continent, Laurasia, and the southern continent, Gondwanaland. The Jurassic was characterized by a warm, wet climate that gave rise to lush vegetation and abundant life. The beginning of the Jurassic was conventionally marked by a temperature spike, corresponding to the eruption of huge volcanoes of the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province. Ocean surface temperatures during this period are thought to have exceeded 30 degrees Celsius. The equatorial and subtropical zones were so arid that life was literally squeezed either into northern and southern latitudes or into the ocean. Later, the species that survived the late Triassic extinction began to bounce back in the early Jurassic. The devastated ecosystems of tropical reefs gradually began to recover. Brachiopods were numerous and diverse. They are marine animals with two shells, an upper one and a lower one. The right and left halves of each shell are mirror images. They moved into a new niche and remained almost unchanged throughout the Jurassic period. Echinoderms proliferated in great numbers, shapes, and colors. Even today, they're very diverse and include starfish, brittle stars, sea cucumbers, sea urchins, sand dollars, and crinoids. And at this time, this riot of shapes and colors was simply incredible. The Jurassic period was great for the development of crustaceans. It was then that the first real crabs appeared. Fossil hermit crabs date back to at least the early Jurassic 200 million years ago. To protect themselves, hermit crabs search for abandoned shells. When they find one that fits, they tuck themselves inside it for protection and carry it with them wherever they go. This habit of living in a borrowed shell gave rise to the hermit crab's name. Ammonoideas were ocean-dwelling mollusks, especially cephalopods. They were devastated by the late Permian extinction. However, they recovered fairly quickly to evolve and change. In fact, they repeated the success scenario of the Triassic period. What about the ichthyosaurs that dominated the oceans of the Triassic? They too had a tough time during the Great Extinction, but managed to squeeze through the bottleneck of evolution. Due to evolutionary advantages, ichthyosaurs became the kings of the ocean again in the early Jurassic and reached the peak of species diversity. The Jurassic period was the heyday of the Temnodontosaurus. It was a formidable predator whose name translates from the Greek as lizard with slashing teeth. Indeed, it has a huge body, up to 9 or even 12 meters long, big mouth with sharp teeth, huge eyes up to 25 centimeters in diameter. Its formidable size inspired fear in the sea inhabitants of those days. ReYOUnosaurus is one member of what still appears to be a small group of ichthyosaurus that had specialized asymmetrical jaws. Judging by its bite and other characteristics, scientists concluded that the ReYOUnosaur followed exactly the same predatory strategy as a swordfish. The elongated upper jaw with thick, sharp teeth was used as a weapon to attack potential prey from the back. During the Jurassic period, the dominance of the ichthyosaurs was threatened by the competing species plesiosaurs. However, they could compete only in size. Plesiosaurs are ancient marine reptiles. They appeared in the late Triassic and grew in numbers during the Jurassic period. 6 types of plesiosaurs crossed the Triassic-Jurassic barrier and gave a powerful push to their evolution. Plesiosaurs, though predators, fed mostly on mollusks and fish. Only the largest species could afford to diversify their diet with sharks and other plesiosaurs. In turn, they could become prey to the sharks, which were numerous in the Jurassic period. This period lasted from about 145 to 66 million years ago. It is the longest, third and final period of the Mesozoic era, when dinosaurs dominated the land. The planet was ice-free, with forests stretching to the poles. However, the Jurassic saw some cooling trends, and they escalated into the early Cretaceous. Snowfalls were common at the higher latitudes, and the tropics got wetter than in the Triassic and Jurassic periods. Ocean life was still as diverse as in the Jurassic. There is no huge difference between these periods. Ichthyosaurs flourished, but only in the early and middle Cretaceous. Toward the end of the period, they did go extinct. They did not survive the so-called oxygen-free event. Its essence is that, due to a complex of reasons, the oxygen content in the atmosphere and the ocean dropped relatively sharply. There were a few such events in the history of our planet, and all of them had the most dramatic effect on the biosphere. Marine reptiles survived the entire Cretaceous period without any problems. More families appeared in the late Cretaceous. One of them, the Mosasaurus. Modern Varanus are their direct, though distant, descendants. Mosasaurus breathed air, were good swimmers, and were well adapted to the life in the warm, shallow inland seas of the late Cretaceous. As the ichthyosaurs became extinct, the Mosasaurus took its place and became the dominant marine predators. Some representatives reached a length of 13 to 17 meters. Back then, there were reptiles which managed to lead aquatic and land lifestyles very well. The most striking example of such combination is Spinosaurus. It was one of the most spectacular carnivorous dinosaurs in the history of the amazing reptiles. It was quite huge as for a predator. The largest representatives reached, according to estimates, from 12 to 16 meters and weighed up to 12 tons or more. The reptile had webbed feet and a characteristically shaped tail, which made it a fast and agile swimmer. The size and shape of dorsal and caudal vertebrae formed a kind of sail, which presumably served as a hydrostabilizer. Little by little, the oceans and seas of the planet began to look more like what we have now. Stingrays, fish, and sharks were common back then. The Ammonoidea reached its peak. They grew huge in size at the end of the Cretaceous. The largest one, Parapazosia sepenredensis, lived during the late Cretaceous period in marine environments in what is now Westphalia, Germany. A specimen was found in Seppenrad in Ludinghausen, Germany, in 1895. It measured 1.8 meters in diameter, being not even a complete shell, but only a part. It is estimated that the size of the Ammonoidea was about 2.5 meters. You can see it on display at the Westphalian Museum of Natural History in Münster, Germany. Earth, 66 million years ago, the end of the Cretaceous period of the Mesozoic era. The parts of the Pangaea supercontinent almost completely drifted apart. The planet looked very similar to its modern state, but not quite the same. South and North America have finally split by the end of the Cretaceous period. Africa, Australia, and Greenland had the same shape as today. At the same time, the outlines of Europe and Asia were just starting to form. Mountain ranges of Siberia, Mongolia, the Andes, and the Cordillera, the continents were actively emerging. The Cretaceous period lasted 79 million years and became the longest period of the Mesozoic era. The planet's climate changed several times during this time. It was relatively cool by the end of this period. Ice caps have formed at the poles. Winters have become harsher. In some places, the temperature dropped below -10 degrees Celsius and as low as -45 degrees Celsius in Alaska. But still, the world was warmer than it is now. Lush vegetation covered the continent's surface. It was during this period that flowering plants emerged. Conifers, ginkgo, and other trees from previous eras formed thick forests, which also included modern-looking walnut, ash, and beech. The sod produced by these trees made the top layer of soil more fertile for newly emerging herbs. With the advent of flowering plants, insects also had to evolve. Butterflies and bees started to fly, spreading pollen. Seeded fruits developed from pollinated flowers, providing food for many animal species, including birds. This is what drove the evolution of some herbivorous dinosaurs, as well as many mammalian species. The number of carnivores, ungulates, insectivores, and primates increased under these favorable conditions. Admittedly, they haven't yet become as large as they are now. Most mammals back then were small rodents and predators. For example, a fossilized head of a 20-centimeter-long Chronopiodentiocutus was found in Argentina. This small mammal is called the saber-toothed squirrel because of its elongated muzzle with long fangs. Presumably, this species ate some insects. But larger animals have already appeared. In Madagascar, the remains of a huge Ventana certici marmot were found. This herbivorous mammal had a rather unusual appearance. It had massive crests on either side of its skull for self-protection and an excellent sense of smell. The animal weighed 9 kilograms and was 3 times bigger than modern marmots. However, Rhipenomammus was the real giant among the mammals of the Cretaceous period. It had a 1-meter body and weighed 12 to 14 kilograms. Outwardly, Rhipenomammus resembled a modern Tasmanian devil or a squat dog. This predator even hunted small or newly hatched dinosaurs. And yet dinosaurs were the pinnacle of prehistoric evolution. They were at the top of the Mesozoic food chain. A great number of dinosaur species of various sizes populated all continents. The smallest were Oculodentavis congrei. The head of this miniature reptile was no longer than 14 millimeters, beak included. Unfortunately, paleontologists haven't yet found the bones of the torso. But given its head size, this dinosaur wasn't bigger than a modern hummingbird. According to some estimates, Alamosaurus was one of the largest animals that ever existed on Earth. These dinosaurs were 29 meters tall, weighed 38 tons, and had a 12-meter-long tail. 5 hours till impact. The day terrestrial life was changed completely. All animals, young and old, were going about their day as usual, doing some foraging and hunting. A herd of 50 Alamosauruses went to the Yucatan Peninsula looking for some fresh greenery. These giants were herbivores. They had to consume up to a ton of vegetation per day to stay in shape. It could take them a few days to eat leaves from an entire forest, which made them lead a nomadic lifestyle. A middle-aged predatory Tarbosaurus living on the territory of present-day Mongolia and China was also looking for food. This 14-meter-long species is considered the largest among the predatory dinosaurs of the Cretaceous period. Our Tarbosaurus set out to hunt for prey in the floodplain. Medium-sized animals and small dinosaurs would often come there for a drink, so the hunt was going to be a success. Like any Tarbosaurus, this reptile walked on 2 hind legs. Its 2-fingered forelimbs were disproportionately small relative to the rest of the body. And yet, they were very helpful in holding the prey or catching fish with long claws. Tarbosaurus's main weapon, though, was about 6 dozen long, sharp teeth reaching up to 85 millimeters. 3 hours until impact. Meanwhile, one adult Pachycephalosaurus was also going about his day in North America. This 4.5-meter-long dinosaur weighed about 450 kilograms and looked quite formidable. Its skull was protected by a 25-centimeter thick bone dome that surely softened the blows when the great reptile fought its enemies. The back of the dome had bony projections and short spikes protruding upwards from its muzzle. Pachycephalosaurus was primarily herbivorous. It crushed leaves, seeds, and fruits with its relatively small, sharp teeth. However, it appears that this dinosaur also included meat in its diet. It ate small amphibians, shell-less animals, mammals, perhaps even newly hatched dinosaurs. On this day, our Pachycephalosaurus got closer to the ocean where it found many trees with nutritious seeds. It could also eat plenty of huge ammonite mollusks, lizards, and other critters in small lagoons. Meanwhile, a female Ankylosaurus went into the forest to grab some lunch in western North America. She was guiding 4 newly hatched cubs. This reptile looked like a nightmarish chimera. It reached the size of a rhinoceros or even an adult African elephant. The body of this tetrapedal monster was covered in powerful bone armor, and it had a massive club-like knob on its tail. But despite its intimidating appearance, Ankylosaurus was a harmless herbivore. The mother of the cubs didn't seek to kill anyone with her club. The tail served to protect against predators and cannibal reptiles. And so, being protected by their mother's formidable tail, the family went into a thick forest near the newly formed Rocky Mountains. 2 hours until impact. Meanwhile, young dinosaurs had a real massacre in North America, hundreds of kilometers away from the site of impending disaster. Some absent-minded Carnotaurus wandered into the territory of the Tyrannosaurus rex and didn't notice the owner in time. At the speed of up to 50 kilometers per hour, Carnotaurus can easily run away from its opponent, who can only run at 40 kilometers per hour. But the T-Rex came into view too unexpectedly. The intruder's smell gave it away a while ago. T-Rex had an excellent sense of smell compared to other dinosaurs. And in terms of eyesight precision, even a hawk might be jealous of this predator. In addition, the reptile's vision was binocular. Its eyes could look in different directions, and then the input from each eye was combined to create a single visual image. This enabled the dinosaur to accurately determine the distance to its prey. And so the T-Rex furiously attacked the enemy to protect its territory and get some delicious meal at the same time. You see, this dinosaur never missed a chance to enjoy the flesh of its own kind. It was up to Carnotaurus now to fight back. If we saw this fight and had to take a bet, everyone would put their money on the T-Rex. The Carnotaurus had no chance. The weight difference was huge. Tyrannosaurus weighed up to 6.8 tons and outweighed Carnotaurus by almost 5 tons. Its muscle mass and therefore strength was multiple times greater. Even with its horn-like projection above the eyes, the Carnotaurus had no chance to fight off the T-Rex's super powerful jaws. Tyrannosaurus quickly tore the opponent to pieces and began its feast right away. It was a great stroke of luck for the reptile. According to some estimates, T-Rex needed up to 110 kilograms of meat per day. This is equivalent to daily intake of 3 or 4 lions. As it was preoccupied with lunch, the reptile didn't care to look up. And so it missed the bright light in the sky that was growing bigger by the second. 10 minutes until the impact. A huge asteroid was approaching the planet. In a few minutes, it will kill 75% of all living creatures, causing the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction event. In 1980, scientists proposed a hypothesis that it was the asteroid impact that led to this disaster. They found far more iridium in 66-million-year-old clays around the world than in layers above and below. This is a very rare substance on Earth, but there's a lot of it in some types of asteroids, which is why iridium is sometimes dubbed a space metal. Scientists suggested that the metal was probably brought by an asteroid in a collision event. 10 years later, another team of researchers determined the exact site of the impact. A crater with a diameter of 180 kilometers was discovered in the Yucatan Peninsula and was named Chicxulub. Its age coincides with dinosaur extinction. Chicxulub has a huge amount of iridium, and as we move away from the crater's center, less and less metal is found. In addition, 25,000 animal fossil fragments were recently found in New Jersey quarries. These creatures died on the same day at the end of the Cretaceous period. This was another evidence of the mass extinction that followed the asteroid impact. 2 minutes until impact. While our Tyrannosaurus was enjoying its lunch, a 10-kilometer rock weighing several trillion tons flew into the atmosphere. The gravity's pull was becoming exceedingly stronger, accelerating the object to a fantastic 20 kilometers per second speed. Like a piston, the asteroid squashed one 20-kilometer air column after another. Along with friction, this process heated the giant rock to tens of thousands of degrees Celsius, making it much brighter than the sun. At the same time, the Tyrannosaurus was having a little break from its lunch. It lifted its head up and was blinded by the light of the blazing sky. The dinosaur quickly lowered its head, closing its eyes. But the light was burning them even through closed eyelids. The heat incinerated the reptile's skin, set fire to the trees and grass around it. A second later, the asteroid disappeared over the horizon, leaving the glowing sky behind. Tyrannosaurus Rex got a little break, but only for a moment. Nothing was happening for a few seconds, but then the sky got blindingly bright. The asteroid crashed into the Gulf of Mexico near the northern coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. The energy released by the impact was approximately equivalent of 10 billion Hiroshima atomic bombs. In a second, the asteroid penetrated about 20 kilometers into the Earth's crust. The whole globe was shuddering like 1,000 bells from the impact. To put this into perspective, a relatively recent Krakatoa volcano eruption caused half of crew members' eardrums to rupture on one of the ships 70 kilometers away. The asteroid's impact was 1,000,000 times more powerful. Furthermore, shockwaves rushed in all directions, faster than the speed of sound right after the collision. They were so strong that they skinned animals alive, lifted them up into the air, swirled them around, and crushed everything, even hundreds of kilometers away from the crater. The heaviest dinosaurs flew like balloons. The T-Rex sustained a severe concussion and died in an instant. Immediately, the shockwave lifted its body up into the air for several seconds. The wave continued to spread, going a few times around the globe. But even before killing the T-Rex, the asteroid destroyed the herd of Alamosauruses that we saw previously. Animals were grazing right next to where the infernal rock fell. Dinosaurs couldn't escape the unthinkable heat. It burned everything to the ground, turning animal bones to ashes. Meanwhile, the female Ankylosaurus with her 4 babies was peacefully eating leaves in the forest. They were hundreds of kilometers away from the impact site. However, they died even before the Alamosauruses. The red-hot asteroid caused huge fires while passing through the atmosphere. One of them broke out where a family of ankylosaurs was grazing. The fire instantly incinerated the forest, leaving the reptiles no chance to survive. The asteroid also knocked out 15 trillion tons of rock from the planet and sent it high into the sky. A small portion flew into outer space while the remaining part, including house-sized boulders, began to fall back from orbit. At the same time, glass rain started. It was raining hot 5-millimeter rock balls. The stone hail and the scorching rain have killed innumerable animals. However, the Pachycephalosaurus, who was hunting near the ocean in North America, was lucky. It didn't die from fires and boulders falling from the sky. But a bit later, when a gigantic 100-meter tsunami rose from the ocean. To get some idea about its scale, consider the devastating tsunami in Japan of 2011. The waves were barely 10 meters high. Nonetheless, almost the entire island state incurred losses. But the giant tsunami caused by the asteroid impact went thousands of kilometers deep into the land. It flooded almost the entire territory of the future USA. Wave traces have even been found in North Dakota. One of these waves took the Pachycephalosaurus under, dragged its body into the ocean, and buried it in the abyss. The area of modern Mongolia. Just then, an elderly Tarbosaurus was looking for a prey. Here, 15,000 kilometers from the explosion epicenter, hundreds of dinosaur species still roamed the wooded areas. Meanwhile, the disaster was getting closer by the minute. The asteroid impact triggered a series of terrible earthquakes measuring up to 11.2 points. The tremors were about 50 times stronger than any earthquake known to humanity. The most powerful Great Chilean earthquake of 1960 had a 9.5 magnitude. Increasing this number by 1 point would mean 30 times more powerful energy release. The planet was shaking so hard that all the volcanoes woke up and began to erupt. About 70 billion tons of pulverized stones, soot, ash, and carbon monoxide rose up as a result of eruptions. Then they began falling back into the atmosphere. Their friction against the air caused enormous temperature increase. A huge hot cloud of dust stormed across the planet, burning everything in its path. It was approaching Mongolia at a speed of 18,000 kilometers per hour. The temperature here rose to 150 degrees Celsius an hour and a half after impact. All living creatures died, or rather, almost all creatures. Our Tarbosaurus and several other animals managed to escape by hiding in an underground cave. They could hide out here while the killer cloud passed by. Soon the temperature began to drop. This was followed by acid rain flooding the Earth. Because several 100 billion tons of sulfur compounds were thrown into the troposphere along with other rocks. For weeks, sulfuric acid was pouring from the sky all over the planet. It poisoned the soil and water bodies. A dense blanket of dust, ash, and soot wrapped around the planet after volcanic eruptions, not letting any light and heat in. Even at noon, it was as dark as at night. The temperature dropped by 28 degrees Celsius. Impact winter set in. When hunger and thirst drove the Tarbosaurus and other animals out of the cave, they saw a world that looked strikingly different from before. It was cold, dark, and deserted. Only decay fungi and molds were able to reproduce under such conditions. There was no food for dinosaurs on the planet. Countless animals starved to death. Our Tarbosaurus didn't manage to survive either. Perhaps it was the last dinosaur on the planet. However, one can assume that occasional dinosaur eggs have been preserved intact somewhere underground. Young individuals hatched from them after some time. Tiny groups of dinosaurs emerged here and there, but cold weather, hunger, and disease contributed to their final demise. The era of dinosaurs came to an end. The Cenozoic era began. The dust clouds dissipated over the planet over the course of several decades, and heat and sunlight were finally able to reach the surface. Nature revived from the ruins. First, huge horsetails and ferns emerged yet again. They were closely followed by angiosperms and grass. Other animals who'd been dominated by dinosaurs for millions of years were ready to march bravely into the new era. Mammals. Some of them survived the disaster in underground burrows, others stayed on trees. They become well adapted to extreme conditions, were quick to reproduce, and consumed relatively little food. They were guaranteed to thrive on the renewed planet. The The success of mammalian evolution led to the emergence of Homo sapiens, who is now the dominant species on Earth. But we're a long way from setting the dinosaurs' record, as it's been a few million years since we've conquered the world. Only time will show if people will rule the planet for 160 million years like ancient lizards.